It was the mid-90s. I was in my early 20s and was on a date with this guy that I had had a crush on for a long time. We went out for dinner. It ended up at a bar until closing time. We stumbled out of the bar pretty drunk and decided to take a walk along the beach, aka awkwardly trying to find a way to move the date along to more physical things. We found a deserted-looking spot and sat down on a log and started making out in a totally obnoxious kind of way. I noticed someone walking behind where we were sitting, but didn't turn to look around, thinking it was someone walking their dog. This area of beach was close to downtown and a really big park, and was usually very active at night, though less so on this night since it was a bit chilly and windy. The person who walked behind us circled around onto the sand, walking close to the water. Again, I wasn't concerned or alarmed. I assumed it was someone else, just enjoying the night. Then I could see that they were standing stock still and staring at us. I couldn't totally make out the person's features, but I could see that they looked angry. I realized he probably thought we were a gay couple, but I could see that they looked angry and disapproving. It was at that moment I realized he probably thought we were a gay couple. My date was obviously male, but I had super short hair and was wearing faded jeans and combat boots. Don't judge it, it was the 90s. So, probably to the guy, I looked male too. And what's more, at this time, a lot of gay males were dressing in kind of a skinhead look, with shaved heads, faded jeans and combat boots. The area that we were in, the West End of Vancouver, had a lot of gay bars, and the park that we were beside was a well-known cruising spot for gay men. I kind of smirked to myself when I realized what the guy was thinking. I kept making out with my date, enjoying the fact that a homophobic person was cringing a few feet from me. That's when I realized that he was holding a big chunk of concrete in his hand. He quickly walked over to us with intent, I'm guessing smashing our heads in. I pulled away from my date and started hurriedly to talk to him, with my face towards the man so that he could easily see I was female. I saw the shock on his face when he realized, and he quickly put his hand behind his back and walked off. I didn't tell my date what almost happened. I just told him that I was cold and wanted to go. I was shaken. If I didn't see the guy and hadn't noticed what he was holding, he might have just smashed one of us over the head with a piece of concrete. There were a lot of gay bashing incidents in that area over the years, but usually it was groups of drunken guys, not a loner like this. I genuinely feel that he was actively looking for someone to hurt that night. This happened when I was 18. I was a male dressed in black pants, a white undershirt, and a black long-sleeve shirt with black shoes. My passenger was a 20-year-old female, dressed in a light-colored shirt with jeans. It was late in the 20th century and life was good. I was driving an original paint job, an interior 1970s Camaro SS, tipped with the scales for driving fun. I was a happy guy. Anne had a request for me to bring my passenger to Las Vegas to meet her family. She was a friend of a friend, so I didn't worry about her, and my car was seeming in good shape for the trip. It was July and very hot in Southern California. The day we took off for Las Vegas, cueing the stereo, we headed out. All was going well in our drive. As the temperature soared from very hot to hot, we made our way along Interstate 15 North. If you've ever driven this road, you know it's extreme, but at that time there was not much along the road. As we progressed to the very long incline where a truck lane to the right exists, the shimmer of mirage came off the road. I didn't overexert the car, but soon noted a warning light on my dash cluster. I smelled something sweet and burnt. Transmission fluid. Not really flammable, but I needed to keep moving. I let my passenger know what was going on and said that I needed to find a place to pull over. On this incline, that was a non-option, so I set the emergency flashes and slowed down to a pace of about 40 miles an hour. As we came to the top of an incline, an exit to the right, named Summit something or other, was there. We exited and headed to what appeared to be a small truck stop, and it featured a prominent tall sign exclaiming EAT. The thing is, it was nearly deserted. Only one old man sat on a bench out front, and otherwise the place was looking long closed and dry. I told my passenger to stay in the car while I inspected it. She lit a cigarette and stepped out. It did not take long to find that the pan gasket for the transmission was leaking badly. I popped the front hood and measured the dipstick. No liquid showing, not good. What I did not have with me was fluid and a gasket. I spoke to the man and asked about the part shop. I had tools with me in the trunk. He was long on slow talking, but seemed decent enough, just hanging out in front of a closed and deserted diner/gas station. He said the nearest place for parts was Las Vegas. I was in distress, and this was before cell phones were common to everyone. Corona didn't even have the row of dealerships along the highway then, and I went to speak with my passenger. There was no working payphone and no means to get any help. The old man was the odd thing here, as he got there somehow but had no car. In a few minutes, a Dodge Ram pick-em-up truck appeared. The man drove up and parked. He got out of his truck and stood about 5'10", and was maybe 60 with a head of white hair and a white cowboy hat and an amiable gut. A mature white guy who carried himself like any redneck would. In short, in my life perspective of that time, I saw no threat there. The man walked over to the old man and they spoke for a bit. The old man gestured to us in a friendly way, and the man seemed jovial and walked over. He introduced himself as Mike, but that everyone called him Hoss. I introduced myself and my passenger, and he did nothing to seem creepy at all. We might as well have been at a social gathering with mixed ages. Hoss said his friend mentioned we needed to get to Las Vegas, and it just so happened that's where he was going. We discussed that I needed to get my passenger to her family, and that I needed to get to a parts store. But if he could just get us to the city, we'd be very grateful. He asked if we had any money, and I told him I had about $40 for gas and was going to get money there and had to get more anyway due to parts. I offered to pay him $60 for his troubles. He laughed and said that was more than enough, and we three piled into his truck. All went well on the drive to Las Vegas, and we all had small talk. When we reached the city, Hoss offered to go ahead and take my passenger to her parents, as they were going to pay me for my trouble, and that would pay parts, a bus to my car, and Hoss's time and trouble. We were all agreeable. We arrived to drop off my passenger, and I stepped in with her for a brief moment to speak with her parents, who gave me $300, which was a lot more than I expected, and that was more than I made in a week. So when I went back to Hoss's truck, he gestured friendly like I'd jump in. He asked how it went, and I told him they paid me a lot more than I expected. He seemed to brush that off and suggested we get a beverage before getting to the parts store. It was a 7-Eleven, and I offered him a soda. He thanked me, and I hopped out and got us each a super big gulp, a monster-sized cup that seemed to hold 2 liters in each cup. Getting in the truck, I passed him his drink and sat in the passenger seat. Hoss said he knew where the parts store was, and he would take me there, to which he happily agreed. I thanked him repeatedly for being such great help. He just chortled and made small talk. In a short while, he turned off a main road and started down a dirt road with nothing but a very distant something. I asked why we were on the dirt road. He offhandedly mentioned it was a shortcut. At first, this made some sense, but the road turned slightly away from the distant building, and we were now in the middle of the desert. I was feeling uneasy but stayed firm as he asked me how much I was paid. I was holding my drink and took a sip. More than my paycheck. He slammed the brakes and reached his burly arm fast around my neck and shouted, "Give me your money, or I'ma kill you." Instinct and perception took over, and I tossed the near full iced big gulp in his face and his front. His grip loosened substantially, and my right hand went for the door handle, and the door opened and I rushed out. I had gotten the element of surprise and won my freedom. Hoss yelled out profanities at me, and I yelled my suggestion of his body being buried here by me. With that, he stepped on the accelerator and tore away from me. I was okay, and he was driving madly away. But here I was in the desert, at least a few miles away from anything, on a summer's day at midday, in clothes better suited to a cool evening. I chose a direction that seemed to be the closest to me and began walking. I have no idea how long it took, but by the time I was nearing my goal, it shone as a new set of homes. I was sweating terribly and just ready to drop. I was mad, I mean really mad about what happened. As I got closer to the nearest home, I saw a man standing there who was dark-haired and lean. He was just watching me walk out of the desert in black. I walked towards him as I got into earshot, and I called out for water, please. The man was holding a shovel, and obviously wary, and as I neared him, he asked who I was and why I was there. I gave a summary, and again asked for water. His garage was open, and he grabbed a cup and ran some water into it from the spigot of the hose. He reached it to me, and I greedily took it and guzzled. As I was in the shade, and the man was talking to me, I told him the whole story and how I ended up there. A sudden thought occurred to me, and I suddenly became concerned for the passenger lady. The homeowner was more at ease with me now, though understandably unwilling to invite me inside. He had an extension for his phone in his garage and allowed me to call the woman's family. I explained what Hoss had done and asked them for a favor of picking me up. They agreed, and I gave the address for where I was. They took my caution to be on the lookout. Sometime later they arrived and picked me up. I thanked the man for his kindness. I was lucky to be close enough to someone. He said not everyone was a bad person. I was taken to a parts store, bought what I needed, and taken to a Greyhound terminal. I thanked them and bought a ticket. A while later the bus arrived and I got aboard. I asked the driver to stop in Barstow. Sitting back, I reflected on what had happened and suddenly realized I was alone, and that psycho knew where my disabled car was in an abandoned place. It was not a safe place to be, but I had to get there. Barstow was close enough to where I was going, but not close enough to walk. I later found out I would have to get off at that exit, since it was a real exit off the highway. Live and learn. So I walked to a diner that was popular with big truckers and sat down, ordered a soda and a sandwich, and a man who was seating next to me asked what my story was, as I looked out of place the way I was dressed. I explained what happened and the man introduced himself. He was a war vet with non-working legs. He had special crutches by him and said he could take me to where my car was as it was on his way. He was driving a fifth-wheel truck hauling cars. I must have looked him oddly as he laughed and said, "Don't worry, I ain't going anywhere as fast with these legs." I laughed kindly with him and agreed. He added that he would help watch over as I fixed the car, just in case this Hoss guy came back. In a short while we headed out, and true to his honor, he waited as I replaced my gasket, torqued the bolts, and added fluid. I then tested it with it running. Not the cleanest way to do it, but it was done. The old man at the store was gone. The sun was waning in the sky, and my car was fixed. I thanked him again, and he told me as a soldier he kept his word, and to this day he remains the same. I felt he was honest, and had a slight restoration of my faith in humanity. We both headed out at the same time, and I made my way home. I became a driver by coincidence, or so I thought at first. Initially I was working as a maintenance manager at a house owned by a very wealthy family. One day while carrying out my usual duties, I was summoned to the boss's office. Upon entering, he greeted me enthusiastically and proposed I become his personal driver, saying that it paid additional salary. After thinking it over, I asked my wife and accepted the offer, knowing that the previous driver enjoyed a good salary and a comfortable life. Although everything seemed normal at first, I soon began to spend less time with my family, as the job would sometimes require me to stay overnight at my boss's house. The situation took an unexpected turn when he proposed that I accompany him on a business trip out of town that would last 12 days. After discussing it with my wife, I accepted, motivated by the generous compensation and the promise of a full week off upon return. However, before we left, the boss gave me a serious and firm warning. He said whatever happened on the trip had to stay on the trip, and that anything I witnessed was not to be disclosed. Although I took it as a threat, I saw it as a precaution against possible compromising situations during the trip, as he held political aspirations. So, on the day of the trip, I drove around 8 to 9 hours to reach the town on the edge of the Sierra. Once there, we began to ascend the foothills, and I simply followed the boss. More than once, it seemed like we were backtracking through the same path among trees and mountains, completely losing any sense of direction. Finally, we arrived to cabins in the middle of the Sierra, a remote location with no cell signal. Before getting out the truck, my boss stopped me and asked for my cell phone, explaining that devices capable of taking pictures or videos were not allowed and that everything was to be kept secret. Although I felt uncomfortable, he was the boss. I had to comply. After handing over the phone, he smiled at me and told me not to worry and to enjoy the trip. Upon arrival, I found that the cabins were divided into a main cabin, luxurious, and large and secondary cabins for drivers and cooks. In the cabin assigned to me, I shared a room with 7 other people, without television signal. They had a selection of DVDs for us. I realized that some people were not on their first trip and were accustomed to this routine. When I got bored, I would leave the cabin and explore the surroundings. I found a place full of ashes, apparently used for bonfires, and when I returned from my exploration, the sun was already setting. I was told to go pick up my dinner, and although I wasn't used to eating at that hour, I did receive it but didn't eat it, leaving the plate beside my bed. It was something that I could eat cold anyway, so I didn't matter. It was later when I felt hungry. I noticed there were no utensils on my plate. I intended to go to the dining room to look for some, but then one of the people there stood up and stopped me and asked where I was going. I explained that I was going to the dining room to get utensils, and he told me I shouldn't go out because it was late. He offered me some he had, so I went back to the table and had my dinner. And when everyone was asleep, I didn't feel that tired, so I went out for a walk. As I approached the door, I was stopped by the same chap, who asked where I was going. I told him I was going for a walk and a smoke, but he forbade me from going out again, saying it was too late. His tone annoyed me, and I decided to open the door, but he stopped me, and he gave me some advice, explaining that the bosses do not tolerate those who snoop and gossip, and warned me about potential serious trouble, and he sounded so convincing that I just shut the door and went to bed. But I couldn't fall asleep. I began to hear strange noises coming from the main cabin. It almost sounded like they were in church. When their singing echoed into the night, an inevitable chill ran through my body. Then, one of the people in the cabin got up and went to the window to look, but was stopped by the same man, who told him the same thing he told me. But the other seemed reluctant to listen, and they began to argue. I still pretended to be asleep. As the song echoed through the night, I woke up as the food handlers were preparing for their tasks. I heard their whispers about what had happened the night before, mentioning those strange songs and disconcerting screams. One nodded, and the other seemed too afraid to speak ill of the bosses. Getting up for breakfast, I expected someone to mention what had happened, but no one said anything. Going back to the cabin, I noticed the man who stopped me and the other chap were no longer there. I decided to ask one of the people if they had also heard what happened the night before, and later when I went out to the courtyard, I saw him returning from the main cabin. The whole scenario was making me feel uncomfortable, but I felt obligated to endure it as I needed the job. All I was hoping for was for the days to pass as quickly as possible, and to keep myself busy, I decided to go to a body of water that was around a 5-minute walk behind the hill. Walking there from the distance, I could make out the imposing statue of a man with a goat's head and huge horns, and one hand pointing up and the other down. That's when I felt someone grab my shoulder. When I turned around, it was the same guy, warning me that this was the second warning he was giving me, and that there would not be a third, emphasizing that I should mind my own business for my own good. Scared and stuttering, I explained that I was just walking and was impressed by the beauty on the hill and the cabin. He smiled ironically and told me he knew exactly what I was doing, warning me of the consequences if he caught me a third time, looking at or doing things I should not be doing. Stunned, I lowered my head and returned to the cabin. Later, one of the cooks approached me, trying to make conversation, and suddenly asked what I saw when I went to the river, mentioning that the guy was upset with me. I made up an answer. In the following days, I preferred not to leave the cabin, only doing so to eat. Some nights later, the songs and chanting resonated again, and that time I was so scared I couldn't sleep. At some point in the early hours, screams could be heard from the cabin. I could have sworn they were hurting someone, although it could have all been in my imagination, as I never saw a thing. The following days were the same, and the last night on the hill was the most disturbing. Their singing had a more harrowed tone, their screams more sharp and intense, and although I couldn't see what was happening, the atmosphere was charged with a disturbing energy. Sleep became impossible, and I eagerly awaited the morning to leave that gloomy place. When the day finally came, I was allowed to approach the main cabin to load my employer's luggage. I don't know why, but as I approached, an uncomfortable and fearful feeling overwhelmed me. But I had to help the boss with his luggage. Upon entering the main cabin, involuntarily, I looked up on the second floor, and I could see the same statue that I had seen when I went to the river, which this time had bloodstains on it. I quickly loaded the luggage and left. We returned to the vehicle, got in, and I began the trip back to the city. Halfway through, my boss asked if I had been snooping. At the question, I got nervous, and he told me he was aware of my curiosity, adding that it was fine, expected even, but warned me that if I disclosed anything seen during the trip, it would not end well for my family and I. However, if I kept the secret and behaved, there would be rewards for me and my family. So, as you can imagine, I said nothing. A year passed, the meeting was repeated, and the second time, I didn't do a thing. But another year later, the boss notified me that we would not be going to the meeting that year because it would not be taking place. But some of the members would be attending his house, and I had to take his wife and daughters to the airport, since they would not be present when the guests arrived. The boss also told me that my presence wasn't necessary, and that if I wanted, I could take a few days off, and I took him up on that offer. I used the opportunity to spend quality time with my family. I knew when the boss's guests were supposed to leave, so wanting to be there in case something was needed, I decided to present myself to the house in the early hours before the guests left in the morning. As I was arriving, I saw a garbage truck that didn't belong to our neighborhood inside the property. It seemed odd, so I got a bit closer to investigate. I parked near the truck and got out to talk to the garbage crew to see what they were doing. Just as I was getting close, I realized from the back of the house they were taking out what appeared to be bodies, wrapped in black bags and throwing them in the truck. I was petrified by the shock. Then my cell phone rang. It was my boss. Don't worry. One way or another they weren't going to wake up. We gave them a purpose. With that, he hung up. And when I turned around, my boss was standing 100 yards away, looking at me. 8 months later, my boss was kidnapped by an organized crime ring. They never released him alive, and that was my way out. Many years ago, I used to work the night shift at a hotel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. During the season it wasn't so bad, mostly families and stuff. We had on-site security too. However, in the off-season, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we'd offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was supposed to be making money in the off-season by renting to what is known as snowbirds. Older retired people who came to the beach for a month, through winter. It did not always work out that way though. The cheap rates made it possible for a less than desirable element to become a long-term resident. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working third shift, I would meet some interesting people. The cold weather would mean some homeless people would come in and get warm and grab a free cup of coffee. I wasn't supposed to let them in, but it's not in me to be cruel. I would let them grab a coffee and get warm for a minute, as long as they didn't cause trouble. As you can see, the night shift in the winter made for some crazy and sometimes creepy stories. I have a lot of them, but this one stands out because it didn't end up well for me. In fact, I had agreed to come in an hour earlier the next night for the young lady that worked second shift in exchange for her working an hour late for me on this night, so that I could enjoy the wrestling show. Ironically enough, I met Terry Funk that night, a wrestling legend known for his hardcore and bloody matches. Little did I know, I was about to experience this kind of violence for real. I was supposed to be there at midnight due to her working over an hour for me. I normally come in at 11 p.m. I counted the register and she briefed me on her shift as to what had happened as per usual. As she was leaving, my friend Andrew pulled up. He worked second shift maintenance at the hotel, and the other two hotels our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work, grab us some food, and we would play World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating for a while since business was so slow. He was just getting my money and ordering food and getting ready to leave. I was excited telling him about how much fun I had at the wrestling show and was showing him my Terry Funk t-shirt that I was so proud of. I was just walking back to the office to put the shirt up when I heard the doorbell, indicating a customer had entered. It is true what they say, not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I had turned around when I heard someone say something loudly, but I still couldn't make out what they had said. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew fall down in front of me. The next thing I know, a guy walks around the corner and punches me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me and I went down to one knee. The next thing I know, he hits me in the head with the pipe. The next thing I know, I hear the other guy who I hadn't noticed in this moment saying that I got away to get a cop. They left out the door. I was finally able to get to my feet. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurting and scared and really freaking out. I realized that they could come back, so I ran and locked the door. I didn't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I called 911. Blood had started pouring down my head, and I told the operator I had been attacked and needed an officer and an ambulance. They called the other hotel we ran and let the night manager called Travis, who was all over 3 properties, know what happened. He thought I was messing with him at first, because when we got bored we would prank each other. I finally convinced him I wasn't joking. He was going to lock up and come down. The cops and ambulance pulled up, and I opened the door. It was at this time that I found out, after they sucker punched and punched him and then knocked him down, Andrew was able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape just as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the ER where I had to have 10 staples in my scalp and they gave me morphine for pain. I had no way to get home after being treated, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and paid for a cab. My plan was to go back to work because this was December and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids and needed all the hours I could get. When I got back to the hotel, the IT guy Ted was there with his wife Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was shocked to see me. She thought I would still be in the hospital. I thought I had only been hit in the head after being punched. The video which Ted was pulling from the police showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy had hit me not just 1, but 10 times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I don't remember that. I guess I was out on my feet. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe till his friend tells him that Andrew got away and got the cops. The 2 of them then ran out. I was given a room at the other hotel, and Ted and Barbara gave me a lift there as I was in no condition to drive due to morphine. They also gave me a paid week off to heal up. They switched me over to the other hotel on night shift for a month just in case they were after me in particular. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed armed robbery due to Andrew getting away and me just not going down. It shook me up though, not knowing. Even though I was at the other hotel when I came back to work the night shift, I was still nervous. Every time the door chimed, I tensed up. I couldn't afford to quit though. As I said, I had 3 kids I was supporting. They never caught the guys as far as I know. A detective stopped about 2 months later when I was working second, and he showed me several mugshots and asked me if any of them looked familiar. I never got a great look at them, as it all happened so fast. I had seen the video, which wasn't the best quality. Even so, 2 of them looked very familiar. I pointed them out, and he asked me how sure I was. I told him honestly, like 85%. He then yells and asks me if I wanted someone to go to jail for an attempted murder on 85%. And I was stunned into silence. I was the victim. I was attacked for no reason and he was yelling at me. It's my fault I was too busy being attacked to get a good look at them. I no longer work at the hotel on night shift, and I'm glad, because it turns out it's just too dangerous in that area. This story takes place in northeast Oklahoma around 2009. I was 14 years old at the time, and back then my aunt and I did everything together. She was my best friend, my rock, my everything really. Our favorite thing to do in our boring rural town was just go driving around. I believe I had just finished school for the summer, as it was May, and she'd offered to take me on a celebratory drive around town. In my hometown, there's an old mental hospital that had been closed since the 1990s. It's located in more of a ruralish area, and I've always been fascinated by it. And she was too. She even worked there as a teenager. There's a prison located extremely close to it with guards in white trucks frequently driving the roads and preventing people from trying to sneak into the abandoned mental hospital. We both decided on driving around this abandoned mental hospital. It's just too cool and creepy. There's a cemetery where they mass buried many of the patients just beyond the hospital and the doctors' houses. Past the cemetery, everything gets rural. You're far from town by this point, and there's only a single lane, lone, winding road. We're driving, having fun, just talking about anything and everything. It's late afternoon by this point, probably 4:30. It's just like any old drive we had been on so many times. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a 90s white Jeep Cherokee behind us. It had seemingly come out of nowhere. We both shrugged it off and thought it might be a prison guard or something. It became unnerving the longer we drove. He never turned onto a side road, he just kept following us. I remember my aunt playing it calm, but I knew she was not fully freaking out. She kept asking, "Is he still following us?" There were times when I didn't see him and I'd say, "No, I don't see him." Then in the next minute he'd be right there behind us. He got close enough at one point that I could see his face. He was very big and bulky, about middle-aged, and I assumed white with a hat, wearing Carrera sunglasses. and his dashboard was covered in junk. We kept on driving further on this road through the middle of nowhere. There were several times we'd lose him, and we would feel so relieved. At one point, we came to a railroad crossing on a hill. After we passed it, I didn't see him. We were so happy, and there he was again. He followed us for what felt like hours. If we sped up, so would he. I still get chills at the memory of looking in the rearview mirror and seeing his face. We were also in such a rural area that we could not get any cell phone signal. Finally, we emerged onto a highway. We had no idea where we were, but just so elated to get to a main road. We turned onto it, and my aunt sped off. I remember we got back to my mum's house and were full of fear and adrenaline. We frantically said we were out driving and this guy just started following us, and my aunt finally confessed how scared she was. We never told the police or anything, and my mum thought we were making a big deal out of nothing. But it was terrifying to be out in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service and a strange car following you for an extended period of time. I remember we spoke afterwards about it, like what if she'd run out of gas or her car broke down? What the hell would we have done? I'm glad we never had to find out. When I was 19, I decided I wanted to move to South Dakota and get in on the ever-growing oil boom. My girlfriend at the time went with me. She found work quickly in a local restaurant, and I steadily drove to drilling gas rigs and inquiring about being hired. We lived in a train car with a couch for a bed. Then a co-worker of hers offered to let us live in her camper in the backyard. It just so happened her husband was a supervisor on the rig, and they actually hired me too. Her husband later came home for the weekend on the Friday before I was heading to work with him, and to make some good money. We got along well. We all went to bed at some point and I slept on the couch to stay cool. At some point in the middle of the night, I felt someone shaking me by my arm. I rolled over and saw the most wonderful and warming sight. There was what appeared to be an angel standing next to me. It said over and over, "Do not run, do not run." I had no idea at the time what that meant. The next day I woke up to our ladies heading to work. Myself and my new boss decided to drive around and look at the sandstone sculptures. That was fun. Then we headed back to the house. When we got there was a 17-year-oldish girl hanging out in the house waiting for her boyfriend, their son. We all sat there for a while talking. Then, he became very aggressive, flirting with her. I told him to leave her alone. He then sprung out of his chair and ran upstairs. A feeling of dread came over me. I told the girl, "Whatever you do, don't run." He was back downstairs in a flash. He had a very large stainless steel 6-shooter in his hand, and he pointed it right at the young lady to my left, and he said, "Let's play a game." Then suddenly, like it burst out of me, I said, "Do me first." He turned the gun on me with the most wicked grin in his eyes that I've ever seen, and pulled the trigger right in front of me. Nothing happened. I was praying vigorously in my head to Jesus for protection. He then held the gun up to his head and pulled the trigger. It went off instantly, finishing his life. His blood and brains showered down upon me in the surrounding area. I checked his pulse and saw he still had the horrific grin on his face. I assumed the girl called 911 as the police in this small 300-person town arrived in a heartbeat. We were outside telling them what happened when the sheriff pointed out that I was covered in blood and what appeared to be brain matter too. I hadn't noticed. I was in shock. They made me strip my clothes on a tarp right there on the spot. I was then taken to the local police station and proceeded to be asked questions for about 3 hours. I was then informed that they determined the cause of death to be suicide. But then I was told that the 6-shooter was fully loaded and the bullet meant for me must have been a dud. They also informed me that there was a perfect silhouette of where I had been sitting and that around it was covered in blood. Then the craziest thing they told me was the bullet that went through his head came at me and went through the wall within inches of my head. They left me in my new orange jumpsuit they gave me, and 2 men came into the room and they took me to a tiny Fleabag motel in a blacked out unmarked car. They told me to stick around for the night and never come back. I was on the road home later that night in the wee hours, with just a story to tell and trauma for the rest of my life. My name is Joaquin. I'm 25 years old and live in Rosario, in a neighborhood close to a forest known as Bosque de los Constituyentes, located in the northwest area of my city. It's got a bit of a safety issue here, which is why I don't really go out much. I generally just stick to my studies, as I'm in my last year of law school. But I do get a bit lonely sometimes, and that's what prompted me to download Tinder, to see if I could meet someone interesting. One night at around 9 p.m, I matched with a girl who only had a few pictures on her profile. They seemed old as they were blurry and somewhat pixelated, but I set that aside. We started chatting. Her name was Joanna. She was 23, and it appeared that she lived in the nearby neighborhood. I liked her because she was very talkative, but at the same time it was strange, because it seemed like she had nothing else to do but to talk to me. And when I didn't send a reply quick enough, she sent me messages insisting I get back to her. It was a Saturday evening when I suggested we finally meet up. She said she was busy until 10 and that she would be finishing work at a nearby supermarket. Now, as I mentioned, my area isn't exactly super safe, so I was quite wary. I didn't want to end up inviting a stranger to my place, so I asked if we could meet elsewhere. She said her place wasn't an option and suggested somewhere else. When I asked where, she said the forest. I declined, saying that it closed at 6 p.m, but she insisted, saying she knew a way in and that it would be quieter and more private, if you get what I mean, and to meet there at 1 a.m, offering to send instructions on how to enter later. I suggested it would be better if we entered together, but she replied a while later saying she would go ahead and check if there were people around or if the terrain was bad, explaining that sometimes people stay in the forest at night, if you get what I mean. This seemed a bit odd to me though. I thought about saying no, or making up an excuse to avoid going, as I really didn't like the place, despite never having actually visited it, neither by day or by night, even though I lived so close. But as the night approached, I got nervous, and thought maybe it wasn't such a good idea to meet there. She insisted so much that I ended up giving in. It was 1:15 a.m, and I left my house very quietly so my dad wouldn't find out. I turned on my phone and saw that I had received a message from her, in which she explained that I had to follow a particular stream until I found a part of the fence that was broken, and that was where I was supposed to enter. I was nervous and a bit scared about the date, but despite the feelings, I also felt quite confident and excited to meet Joanna. But the deeper I went into the forest, the more that confidence crumbled. The place looked desolate and spooky, and I kept asking myself what the hell was I getting into. I moved forward until I reached the stream she mentioned. My skin at this point was crawling, and it was genuinely very cold out. I followed the stream until I found an area with a broken wire, which I assumed was the place she meant. I entered, but just as I took a few steps, I immediately grabbed my phone and sent her a message telling her that I was there. At that moment, I heard the sound of a nearby phone. She replied, "I see you." It was getting a bit too creepy for me. How could she see me? It was all pitch black. What was I gonna do? What was gonna happen? These were some of the questions that were running through my head. and suddenly I started to hear footsteps on the grass, as if someone was approaching. Then I heard a hello from afar, but that voice somehow told me things were going to end badly. It was somewhat distinctive. It seemed to be getting closer to me, and from the distance she said, "Please turn that off. I have a surprise for you, but I want to show you something, no cheating." Despite my doubts, I ended up turning it off. I need to emphasize that my phone in particular turns the flashlight on and off by shaking it, so I shook my phone and it switched off. I pocketed it and continued waiting. Then I heard the steps get closer until they were just feet away, but I still couldn't see anything. "What are you doing, Joaquin? You took a while." I didn't reply. I was too nervous. She came closer and grabbed my hand. "Come on, I want to show you what I promised." Her hand was strange. It felt very padded and cold. The hairs on her arms were thick, prickling my skin, and we started to walk in a straight line. But with every step, my fear intensified. We had walked quite a bit without exchanging a single word. Maybe it was only a minute, but in my head it felt like hours. Eventually, I stopped walking and asked her, "What are we doing? Where do you want to go?" That's when I heard other footsteps. They weren't ours. They were a bit further away. It was at that moment my nerves skyrocketed, and my heart seemed to want to jump up my chest. "It's okay, Joaquin, we're just walking." Then I grabbed my phone and shook it, turning on the flash, and I started shining it everywhere. I was terrified. This person wasn't a 23-year-old girl, but a woman of around 50, wearing a black and red dress. Her face looked evil, with hatred plastered all over it. But that's not all. As nervous as I was shining the flashlight everywhere, and from afar I could see other people. They were wearing dark clothes too, so all I could really make out were their heads. Then, in the distance, a very bright light shone, and at the same time, a heartbreaking scream of pain was heard. I turned around and could barely notice that in the distance there was a group of these people gathered around a cross where it appeared a person was nailed, and they had started to set it on fire. At that point, Joanna grabbed me tightly by the hand and tried to pull me towards there. I think it goes without saying that everything was clearly a setup. The woman had posed as someone my age to deceive me, and who knows, probably to kill me or use me in a ritual. They were definitely a cult. My parents always taught me to never lay a finger on women, but at that moment, that went out the window. I wasn't going to die there, and since struggling didn't help me break free from her grasp, I punched her directly in the face. I didn't hesitate, and started running, trying to find the way I'd came. I don't think they followed me, or I ran too fast because I reached a fence, jumped over it and just kept on running, until I saw a light. It was a house with its lights on and people inside. I ran towards them and they looked worried. When I told them what happened, they told me I shouldn't wander around there at night, because strange things have been known to happen out there. I was trembling and in shock. I called my parents, who arrived some 15 minutes later, and for days I looked for that woman's profile, but her contact had disappeared, and her number was marked as non-existent. On Tinder, her profile had completely vanished. Be wary who you meet online. Try to always meet first in a public place, as you never know what people's intentions truly are. It was 2008. My daughter was 16 and an all-star cheerleader, which meant that we traveled for competitions all across the US. We were living in Maryland at the time and heading to Ohio. I decided to drive instead of fly. It was way cheaper. We would drive the first 8 hours or so, cross the border into Ohio and stay in a hotel. Then we'd get up early and drive 2 hours to the competition. The hotel was only a few years old, a Marriott, and as soon as we entered the room, my daughter looked around and headed to the bathroom, walked out and said, "I don't like this room." So of course I mum and mention how new the hotel is and that it was nice and clean and comfortable. Honestly, I didn't understand. I couldn't understand why she didn't like it, because that's all she said several times. Anyway, we went to eat and came back to go to bed. Again, she's saying she doesn't like the room, and I'm thinking, ugh, teenagers. And oddly, she's using the bathroom with the door open and telling me not to walk over. Again, teenagers. As usual, I watch TV until I fall asleep. She is already asleep. I wish I could fall asleep that fast. Later, I turn the TV off and prepare myself to fall asleep when I hear her rustle in those crisp new sheets. Then again, it was loud, crisp, almost like a whooshing sound. I figured she was pulling those tightly tucked sheets out. I'm laying on my left side, her bed on my right, when the whooshing happens again loudly. So I turn to see what she's doing when I hear the whoosh going straight up between our beds, crisp as can be. And there, between our beds, is what I think is my daughter standing with the sheets over her head. What the heck is she doing, I'm thinking. I quickly realize it can't be her, because it's almost to the ceiling, and there's nothing under this sheet-like thin human structure, when suddenly it drops to the floor fast, making a swooshing sound, and it did it with a ripping effect. All of the white plummeting down. I was so freaked out. I sat up super fast, scared, confused, turning the light on, and there Christine was sleeping in her bed. I didn't know what to do. I turned the TV on, and when it was fully illuminated, I turned off the light as I was starting to wake her up. I was frozen in my bed. There was no way I was going to look around at that point. The TV would stay on all night, I was so afraid. My heart was pounding and my breath erratic, and it took me a while to calm down. I stayed awake a long time, my eyes constantly surveying the room. When I finally fell asleep, a depression on the corner of my bed, like someone sitting down, woke me. I didn't move much, just my eyes. I was scared and very cautious. I thought maybe it was Chrissy, but nothing was there. Again, I'm awake, then fall back to sleep. Early in the morning, before the alarm would sound, I felt someone bending down to me. Like, you can feel without hearing it type of movement? And then a kiss planted on my cheek. I froze, popped open my eyes, and nothing was there. It wasn't my daughter. At that point, it was time to leave. So I woke my daughter and said something to the effect of, "Good, I'm ready to go." We went to the lobby with our bags, got breakfast, as it was 6 a.m. While we're at the table, she says to me that she had a terrible night's sleep and that I kept her up. Now I feel bad and apologized for the TV. When she asks me, why did I keep sitting on the end of her bed during the night? And why did I kiss her on the cheek in the morning? Excuse me, what? It happened to her too. We sat there discussing what the depression felt like. A kiss, a man, and I think she thought I was messing with her. So I told her about the crisp sheet thing rising and falling when she blurts out, "I told you I didn't like the room. I knew it was bad." It was at that point that I realized why she didn't like the room. Not because she was a moody teenager, but because she felt something that I did not. She told me when she walked into the bathroom right away, she felt as if someone had died in there, that they took their own life, that it was dark and foreboding, and that's why she wouldn't close the door when she was in there. But what she hadn't clarified to me was why she hated the room so much. Honestly, she'd have just told me I'd have changed rooms, but here's an even creepier part. After we discussed this, I see a girl at the front desk and decide to go over and ask her if the hotel is haunted. Now, this was a new hotel, but I did anyway. The clerk said, "Which room are you in?" I answered and she stood still, looked at me and walked into the back room and never came out again. I stood there for 5 minutes. Nothing. We gathered our things to leave and she still hadn't come out. When we were walking out the sliding doors, I saw her peek her head out and pop it in again quickly. It was so bizarre. Was she messing with me? Who knows? I don't have a lot of paranormal experiences, but the one I have had did stick with me. It didn't feel like any foreboding or darkness in that room. It simply scared the crap out of me. Chrissy definitely locked into something I couldn't sense upon arrival, and I've always thought myself to be sensitive. I've told this story to many people, but Chrissy does not like hearing it at all. She doesn't discuss it. To her, it's over and done. But the truth is, we know it scared the daylights out of her too, which is why she doesn't want to relive it. Marriott does not own that property anymore. I looked it up on their website. I don't know why. Maybe, just maybe, too many stories have come from that hotel. When I was 17, I was driving in one of those small towns without the community feel. It was a toxic place rampant with drug addiction and crime. I learned from a young age to watch my back and where to not go past dark or ever. This town held a lot of trauma for me, some trauma even scarier than the incident I'm about to share. I left this town a few short months after this happened, and I would never think of going back after this point. For context, I am female and was working a lot and finishing up my senior year, and we didn't have a working washer or dryer at home, so I had to go to the laundromat to do my laundry. I lived on the outside of town. It took a whole 5 minutes to get into town, but we were so secluded and there were no street lights, and I lived on a street between two mountains. We were down the street from this abandoned dairy farm. We had acres to ourselves and we were really secluded. It was so dark out there, and there was only my street and the cross street to get to my street. So, you knew when a car was on the road. One afternoon, I found some time to take my laundry to the laundromat and took my mum and brother's laundry with me, so my mum wouldn't have to do it during her work week. This meant I had 3 times the laundry to do, and it would take longer at the laundromat, but there was a good Hastings next door, so I didn't worry too much as long as I was able to leave before dark, as it wasn't a very good idea to be out at that time. By the time I left, the sun was almost down, so it all worked out, and by the time I was on the cross street to get to my street, it was completely dark, and I was all alone out there. I thought I turned onto my street, and within seconds there was someone behind me, as close as they could be to my vehicle without hitting me, and they had their brights on. This confused me, as I had seen no other cars on the street before I turned onto my own. It was like their lights were off until they were directly behind me. This gave me a pit in my stomach, so I sped up, but they kept up behind me. This was a windy, dark road, and my headlights were poor, so I was really starting to get anxious. I made a judgment call and drove right past my driveway. I didn't feel right possibly alerting some creep to where I live with my mum and baby brother, especially since the cell reception was so poor out there. The person behind me was still as close as they could get to my bumper, and I kept speeding up. I knew that up ahead there was a fork in the road. Going straight would lead me to the downtown area, and it's the way people go when they're heading that way. To go to the left, you entered a residential area with only a few homes, and a road that only really allowed 1 car at a time. At the last second, I turned onto this street without turning my blinker on, in hopes that the car behind me would keep going straight. They turned with me. By this point, I was very scared, but still hopeful that maybe the car behind me lived in the area. We were going close to 50 miles an hour now, and just kept speeding up, as the car behind me really wasn't backing off, but staying as close as they could. They stayed so close that I couldn't even tell what was the make of their vehicle, or whether they were driving a car or SUV or truck. I definitely couldn't tell who was in it. I couldn't understand why they weren't backing off, and I was afraid that if I slowed down, they'd rear-end me. All of a sudden, I see a home directly in front. and I had to turn left or crash into the home in front. Luckily, my car made the turn. I kept going and made a left to get onto the road that leads downtown. The car was still behind me. They didn't live in that neighborhood, and at this point I'm sure they're following me, and I make the decision to drive to the sheriff's office, but I'm not sure how to get there. We're going around 60 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and we start to pass a street that I finally recognize that will lead to the sheriff's office. So I turn, but I turn so late that I might as well have made a U-turn. Finally, the car behind me can't make the turn and they keep driving. I drove around and made a lot of turns to ensure the car wouldn't end up driving behind me again. Finally, I pulled my car over and cried. I was safe this time, but I returned home terrified, and it changed the way I drive to this day. I moved to a more populated city, and I live in a large apartment complex. But I will still drive past my apartment when I get a weird feeling about someone behind me. Anytime someone pulls into the apartment behind me, I drive right past my apartment and circle the complex until I can park with no one watching. My paranoia possibly saved me, and my mum and baby brother, from something that could have been so much worse. Pay attention to those behind you. Waste gas and drive past your home if you're scared. It might save your life. My mum and I had a really long day of running errands, and we're heading home for the evening. We discussed stopping at our local convenience store for gas and drinks. The closer we got to the convenience store, we both simultaneously brought up the fact that we were both tired and just wanted to go home and crash. I even remember just exactly what my mum said. We can just get gas in the morning. Little did either of us know that it was probably the best decision we had ever made. The next morning we got up and sat in the living room to watch TV. The news opens with a story of how 3 teens robbed, shot, and killed a convenience store clerk and severely wounded a customer. The convenience store? The very same one my mum and I had planned to stop at on the way home, about 5 to 10 minutes before the robbery and shooting took place. My mum and I were shaken beyond belief. I have absolutely no doubt had we stopped there, neither of us would have lived to tell the tale. I lost my mum in January of 2019, and I'm grateful every day that it wasn't 21 years earlier. I was going through a devastating depression after finding out that the woman I had been with for 4 years was cheating on me with someone from her work. It hurt to face the reality that my hopes and dreams had abruptly vanished. I tried to keep my mind occupied with work to avoid thinking about what could have been. Dealing with destructive thoughts was a challenge, and after work I drowned my sorrows in alcohol, in an attempt to forget the wounds that the woman had inflicted upon me. Thus my days passed in my role as a police officer, patrolling a wealthy neighborhood and questioning why that woman had betrayed me in that way. Upon learning about my situation, my colleagues tried to cheer me up and occasionally introduced me to some of their friends. However, at the time, I had no desire to meet anyone else. I felt humiliated and devoid of the will to live. One night, my patrol partner and I stopped to have dinner near a convenience store, and it was there that the laughter of a girl in the store uniform caught my attention. So I turned around, and there I saw Pearl. I don't want to go into too much detail, but after a few months, Pearl and I became a couple, and we married 2 years later. I always asked her to quit her job, but she was never keen on the idea, so she continued to work at the same store near the restaurant where I used to eat at with my partner. Pearl daily would send me 2 messages, when she left home to go to work and when she got there, because I would always pick her up after her shift, so it was always just those 2. But one afternoon the message that she'd arrived at work never came, which made me anxious. My partner tried to calm me down, suggesting that she just forgot, or maybe her phone had run out of battery. When I had the chance during patrol, I deviated from our route to go to the store, thinking that if her phone had died, she would be at the store, and I would be happy and carry on my way to work. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be sharing this story with you now. Because when I arrived, I was informed that she had not come into work that day. That is when my heart sank into my stomach. I called her parents. They knew nothing. I couldn't continue with my shift. I went to her parents' house, and from there I began calling our mutual friends and off-duty police officers to help me start a search. I informed my boss, but I knew perfectly well that they couldn't prioritize my situation. The matter was that the state governor belonged to a different political party than the sitting mayor, so the governor's people were closely watching us, waiting for an opportunity to make the mayor look bad. Therefore, the mayor had spoken with the police chief and said that if anyone in the department found themselves in the unfortunate need to request support for anything, it could be provided as long as there were no more important issues at the time. I filed a report, but we had to wait at least 8 hours to receive official support from my colleagues at the department. It was during those 8 hours that my colleagues, who were off duty or got away from their tasks, helped me look for Pearl. We talked to the neighbors, visited hospitals in our city and the surrounding one, but no dice. After the 8 hours had passed and the search officially began, with calls to police departments in other cities, alerts to the Attorney General's office and the federal police, I knew with every passing minute that something was terribly wrong, and my anxiety and desperation were just intensifying. In the first 24 hours, we confirmed that she wasn't in any hospitals in the 4 closest cities, nor in any morgue. Then a call came to Pearl's parents' house. The caller said he had seen a young woman similar to Pearl's features being taken. They were walking when a vehicle blocked their path. 2 men got out, grabbed her by the neck, and flung her in, saying it was a grey SUV with 2 doors and a large trunk. The last thing they said before hanging up was the direction the SUV went in. They said it took a street that connects the highway leading to the eastern part of the city, which is less urbanized. You know, unpaved streets, fewer traffic lights. Just like that. But unlike what you might imagine, it wasn't somewhere known for its criminal presence. That's why I found it strange. This call came at around 1 a.m. and Pearl's parents immediately called me, and since it was late and I didn't want to bother my boss, what I did was notify my colleagues, who I knew would back me up. So the 6 of us agreed to meet at a local convenience store by the highway, and we went in a caravan to the neighborhood. Obviously not in our patrol cars, but our personal vehicles. We had just entered one of those neighborhoods when a grey SUV with 2 doors and a large trunk sped past us very quickly. Given its speed and time of night, we decided to follow it. We didn't get too close, simply speeding up enough to keep up with its taillights in view, maintaining a distance of around 200 yards. When we noticed the vehicle starting to slow down, we kept our speed and overtook it, but it was intentional. If the SUV was slowing down, it was because it was about to turn, which didn't lead to a neighborhood at all, but a dirt road cutting through an undeveloped terrain area. By the time we arrived, the SUV had moved further down the dirt road, but we weren't worried because the terrain was rough, so the SUV would have to move slowly. We left 5 cars halfway, and the 6 of us got into a single vehicle and followed the dirt road with the lights off. For the first few yards, we had to speed up a bit to catch up to it, without getting too close, just keeping its taillights in view. The SUV entered what seemed to be a kind of estate, and we stopped around 300 yards from it, got out, and went to check on foot. What we did was start walking around the walls that surrounded the estate, looking for any gap, even a small one, to peek inside. But we didn't find anything all the way around. Obviously, we couldn't just look through the gate, so someone suggested we climb to see what we could see from a distance. We found a tall tree, and one of our guys climbed up. He was there for no more than 30 seconds when he told us something strange was happening. There were men dressed in robes, and there was a large bonfire, and there were girls tied up around it with their faces covered, and that there were at least 9 people with long guns. We had weapons, but they were pistols, and if we tried anything, we knew we would end up dead. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't even know if Pearl was amongst the girls inside the estate, but if there was even the slightest possibility, I had to take it. We all went back to the car. My colleague made a call to some higher-ups, and 20 minutes later, a SWAT team arrived. We explained the situation and busted in. Using a truck, they knocked down the estate's gate, followed by another 2 trucks. There were a lot of gunshots, but the whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes. One of them signaled us and we ran over there, especially me, heading straight for where the girls were. But before I could reach them, 2 of their men stopped me and said, "Look, you don't want to see this. Tell us what your goal looks like. We've seen them all." When they said that, my blood ran cold, because I realized the girls were already dead. My colleague caught up to me and saw how nervous I was. They asked me what was going on, and the leader of those guys came over and said they would let me see. And yes, there was Pearl, in the same condition as the other guys. She had been suffocated, with hand marks around her neck, her eyes open, but it looked like she had fought until her last breath. It's not really a consolation, but it was nice to know. They had defended themselves with all their strength. The victims all had burn marks on their feet. Apparently they had been made to walk on something hot. Their hair had been cut. I vomited from the shock. I was devastated and fell to the ground crying. Then, from under a car on the estate, they dragged out a man who was hiding. They were about to shoot him when he was ordered to come over and was asked to reveal what the hell had happened here. He never used the word cult or sect. He just said they were a group of people gathered to hold masses in honor of their god. But regardless of his denial, that's obvious what they were: a cult. The man continued talking, mentioning that the estate was used for not only their strange masses, but other activities I can't detail here. Then he revealed that it wasn't just them, and that they had allies in high places. Not sure what he meant by that, but it sounded like he was implying they were connected with influential people. I was consumed with rage. I wanted to take his life, but I was stopped. They needed him alive. I had to restrain myself. Honestly, I'm very grateful because although I couldn't save Pearl, I was able to at least recover her body and give her a proper burial. I used to work in audiovisual in Chicago, where I was assigned a night gala at the esteemed Astoria Hotel set in the opulent Grand Magnolia Ballroom. Legends whispered about a tragic tale involving a woman who met her demise by leaping from the hotel's heights, supposedly after discovering her husband's affair in the very same area. As I sat up alone amidst the grandeur, I couldn't shake off the chilling atmosphere. My task seemed routine at first, placing speakers and monitors, but then the inexplicable began to unfold. One by one, my monitors were mysteriously unplugged from the wall sockets. I shrugged off the occurrences initially, attributing them to technical glitches or mere coincidence. Yet as I secured them with tape to prevent further disturbance, a spine-tingling event occurred. As I was on the cusp of completing the setup, all 6 monitors simultaneously detached from the walls, defying logic. A surge of fear gripped me like never before, propelling me to flee the room in terror. Although I returned to fulfill my duties and complete the show, my nerves remained on edge. Hastening through the tasks and avoiding lingering in the empty ballroom, I ensured to leave before the banquet concluded, unwilling to face solitude once more. This happened to my mum's friend. One day the friend and her sister were driving on a freeway, but the car crashed and flipped and rolled over 5 lanes. My mum's friend was the only one conscious, and she was trapped under the steering wheel, and her sister's head was bleeding badly. She said a normal-looking man wearing white appeared out of nowhere, came up to them, and took off his shirt to wrap around the sister's head, and then he left. When the paramedics arrived, they asked who wrapped the sister's head, and she told them. The paramedics asked where he went, and she pointed to the direction he walked. The paramedics said they'd just come from that direction and no one was on the road for miles. They also said that he wrapped her head in such a perfect way that she would have bled out had he not done so. We were at a Sportsman warehouse in Colorado with our parents. I was 14 and my little brother was 12. We were on a trip to see family, so we were about done walking around and decided to sit down in the camping chair aisles while we were waiting for our parents to be done shopping. While we were sitting there, a lady that looked cracked up on some sort of drug walked up to us and started asking us odd questions. She asked us, "Where's the Colorado River? Can you show me on the map in front where the Colorado River is?" There was a map of the US in front of the store, right by the entrance. She kept telling us to walk up there with her because she needed help finding the Colorado River. We were both weirded out and started to walk to find our parents. She kept following us and didn't stop. We found our parents and I told them what happened. My mum started to yell at the lady, but she wasn't even going away after that. We checked out and started leaving the store. When we walked out, we saw the creepy lady and 4 men run out of the store near a van that was hidden out of the way of any camera view. 2 of the men were waiting outside the store, and that is when I realized what was happening. The lady wanted my little brother to go to the front of the store so that the 2 men could take him and run to the van. I'm so glad we followed our instincts and didn't follow her. And to this day I'm very cautious when I go into town, especially because I live on the border of Mexico and Arizona. Don't talk to strangers even if you're an adult. You never know how many people might be in on the abduction. This took place on October 1st, 2021. We go to Las Vegas frequently because we only live a few hours away in California, and we were heading there for a typical excursion. I enjoy trying new food or staying at a different hotel each time. Over the years, we've stayed at nearly every hotel on the Strip. Some of these hotels are decades old, dating back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, so understandably we've witnessed the occasional strange noise, smell, or bump in the night. But the strangest thing that ever happened was the newest edition. Resorts World opened in June of 2021, and I was excited to stay there because it was something genuinely new for both of us. It was also our first time traveling post-pandemic, so we spurged a little and stayed at the Comrade side of the hotel, which was marketed as an affordable luxury hotel. It was a beautiful room with all new technology embedded into the room to make things convenient and fun. I couldn't have been more pleased with the room. We unpacked, explored the resort downstairs a bit and did some gambling, ate dinner, and then I headed up to the room to get ready for bed. While I did that, my boyfriend stayed downstairs at the resort to do some more gambling and drinking. He usually stays up a lot later than me, so this was pretty normal. While I was laying in bed on my phone, I started to hear noises. Most of the noises were common hotel noises like pipes in the walls, bumps from the floor above, plumbing, and then another room start their shower, standard stuff. But some of the noises were not normal. Mainly I could hear creaking from the bathroom, as if someone was there standing or walking, almost like they were standing at the sink getting ready for bed, moving around like a normal person. I didn't really notice it though, until the sounds started to move towards me. Leaving the bathroom and moving into the bedroom, it sounded like footsteps approaching, but they were slow and uneven. I looked up from my phone and didn't see anything. I reasoned with myself that it was nothing, but something was off. It just felt off. Like I said before, we came to Las Vegas frequently, and we've stayed at nearly every hotel, but I've never felt creeped out like this. Even though my mind was being rational, it's just the floor, it's nothing. My heart rate was going up. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't control it. It was like something was in the room with me, giving me a terrible feeling. I stared into the darkness for a few minutes and could still hear the steps coming closer. I was staring right at it, but there was nothing there. They were moving so slowly, and they were approaching the foot of the bed. I could feel the goosebumps. I couldn't even blink. The footsteps stopped at the foot of the bed, and then the room fell eerily quiet, completely silent. But whatever it was still there. It was at the foot of the bed, just there. Was it watching me? What were its intentions? My phone frozen in my hand. I didn't even want to look away. I was so scared. I don't know how much time passed. I was just staring at the empty, silent hotel room. But eventually I managed to text my boyfriend and ask for him to come up, that I was getting spooked by myself. He said he would. This gave me some comfort, and I tried to get my courage back to calm down. I could hear common hotel sounds again, and that was comforting too. Perhaps the thing left while I distracted myself. When my boyfriend came to the room, he teased me for being spooked. We had a laugh and he got ready for bed, and I felt better, and mostly forgot about what happened. I think we both agreed the noises were just because the hotel was new and hadn't been lived in very much. However, one thing we both feared in every Las Vegas hotel was a break-in. So my boyfriend put his giant hydro flask water bottle in front of the entry door. We do this at every hotel, so that if someone tries to sneak in, which happens a lot in Las Vegas, they would knock over the loud water bottle and startle us awake. Finally, we both went to sleep. I was fast asleep when something jolted me awake. It was my boyfriend thrashing out of bed, throwing the covers back, yelling, "Hello? Who's there?" He rushed his feet and headed straight for the entry door. I was still half asleep and asked, "Huh?" I was squinting because the room was very bright now, but my boyfriend looked distraught and didn't answer. He went to the bathroom, checked behind the door, the closet, the couch area. It was obvious something had spooked him. "What happened?" "The lights turned on. Did you do that?" "No. Maybe you bumped them in your sleep?" "No. They all came on." Something, somehow, had triggered all the lights in our hotel room to turn on in the middle of the night. The bathroom, the bedroom, the little hallway in front of the door, everything. What could have possibly switched on all the lights at once? We sat in confusion for a few moments. Then I tried to think clearly. Did someone try to break into the room? No. The stuff in front of the door hadn't been moved. The water bottle was still upright. Was there a master button you could press that turned everything on? No. Were there two separate master buttons, one for the bedroom and one for the bathroom? Maybe it was a wiring issue. After all, it was a new hotel. Perhaps that sort of thing happens. We decided to call front desk. We weren't even sure what to say to the clerk on the phone, so we just told her all the lights had turned on and woken us up, and that we hadn't pressed any of our light switches. She herself sounded pretty confused and asked if we wanted someone to be sent up to take a look at it. At this point it was 3 or 4 in the morning, so we said no. She said okay, and took note of our call and wrote down the issue. We hung up, sat in silence for a while as we were both creeped out, but did our best to go back to sleep. The next day we spoke about what happened, but we couldn't come to any definite conclusion. To this day I'm still puzzled by it. The front desk never contacted us to tell us how the issue was resolved. It may very well be that the new hotel was still working out its wiring. But what were those eerie footsteps coming towards me in the middle of the night? Was it a phantom messing with us? I wish I remembered the room number, so that I can request never to stay in there again. You know, just in case. This happened 3 years ago during COVID time. It was my son's birthday, and we were all in quarantine due to being exposed to someone who had COVID. Because of that, we had to cancel our plans. We decided to take a drive, as we love driving around in the country and hiking, and went to an old church and Masonic lodge that is not in use at all, with its hometown being famous for a big goat statue mounted on top of the steeple. The statue was a gift from someone in Dundee, Scotland, a very old place. No one was around, so my son and I decided to take a look about. We got to ring this huge brass bell by pulling a rope. My boyfriend and other son were far away from us in the empty parking lot. We left, and they were amazed how loud the bell was. We kept driving and exploring until it got dark. My eldest son said he wanted to stop at the graveyard and then go ring the bell one more time. It was his birthday, so I told him he could do as he pleased. We walked to the graveyard, paid respect to the extremely old graves, and even picked up trash, then just sat down on the road and went back to the Masonic Lodge/Goat Church. We pulled it again, and no one was around. The church is right by the busy highway, no sidewalk, steep stairs or anything. My boyfriend and I decided to stay by the van to smoke a cigarette, and I could see the black outlines of my boys walking towards the front of the church. Well, suddenly out of nowhere, there were what looked like 3 more young men/teen boys walking towards my kids and approaching them quickly, as though they knew my kids. Well, of course, my first instinct was to go over there and make sure they weren't up to no good, but I also wondered where the hell they came from. I walked towards them to make sure all was well, and I heard the bell ring. Then suddenly one of the unknown silhouettes charged at my eldest son, and when this happened, my boyfriend ran with his knife, yelling, "Hey!" at the people. He ran around the corner to approach the group, and I was behind him but not as fast. As I approached the steps, my boyfriend and my kids were starting to run to the car. There was no one there but my family, and I asked, "Where are they?" They just screamed at me to run. I repeatedly asked, "Where are the people?" "There are no people, run!" On our way home, we talked about this insane experience the whole time. We all saw 3 people walking up to my kids right next to them. It looked like they had all planned to meet there. They were walking as a group until one started running towards my son with intent. But my boys never saw them. There was no one there. There is no way they couldn't have noticed them, and there was nowhere for them to hide after. It's all very open and there are no hiding spots. The boys also described how when they reached the steps, it felt like a dream. They got nervous and they quickly rang the bell before my boyfriend got to them. The big brass bell is very loud and can be heard far and wide. Both boys rang it. I only heard it once, and I saw 3 people vanish. My boyfriend and youngest son felt nervous and negative and scared the whole way home. My eldest son, the birthday boy, and I were excited and felt no malignancy whatsoever. My eldest and I always have loved things paranormal, but tonight removed that little piece of doubt in the back of my mind, as I never thought something like that would happen to me. We prayed for protection on the way home. You never know, guys. Anything can happen. This happened around 6 years ago. My family owns a flower and produce shop, and we travel to farmers markets sometimes. Most of the family are not well enough to pick in the garden and do heavy loading, so we often hire people for the summers. My uncle hired this guy called Kevin. He was in his late 30s and down on his luck. He was going through a divorce and needed some extra income. He was very nice, almost too nice. He was actually camping on our land because his ex-wife wanted to have their house. At this time, I was around 16 years old. One day, he found me in an alcove-type spot where no one else was around and gave me his card with his personal number if I ever wanted to hang out. He was very insistent that we should do it that day after work and kept nagging at me for my phone number. I was immediately creeped out by this and politely told him we would see, just to get him away from me. I want to clarify that he knew I was underage. I immediately told my mum, who kind of brushed it off, but he gave me bad vibes. A few days after this, he didn't show up for work and called a few times. After no contact whatsoever, we read in the newspaper a day or two later that he crashed his ex-wife's birthday celebration and tried to kill her. She drove to the nearest police station and he gave chase, actually crashing into parked police cars in his haste. He is still in prison, and I'm really glad that I did not have the pleasure of hanging out with him. My brother used to work in housekeeping at a historic inn. He told me on various occasions he would be trying to clean when he'd see something out of the corner of his eye or in a mirror. Beds would untuck themselves when he turned his back, and on several occasions he'd hear footsteps behind him, but when he turned to look, there'd be no one there. He'd be vacuuming the floors and carpets for the machine to suddenly turn off. Sometimes when he was around a corner, he assumed that the cord had snagged, but there'd be several times where the cord had just simply been unplugged from the wall and not been pulled at all. It became too much for him, and one day he worked up the courage to speak about it with his manager. When he did, she just replied, "Oh, ignore that. It's happened forever." Not exactly the words of comfort he wanted to hear, but there you go. I stopped at a co-worker's house one night after a late shift to drop off something she had forgotten. I didn't know exactly where I was, but I was familiar with the town and knew the highway I had to take home was very close, so I turned on the GPS to get me back to the highway. Sometime after 3 a.m., the GPS bugged out and started leading me in circles before finally spitting me out on some back-wooded road in the middle of nowhere. I drove around a bit until I saw a man just walking in circles next to the road. I'm a young woman with a small stature, and I've seen enough movies to urge me to keep driving, but I kept watching him in my rear view. When I looked back to the road, I had to slam on the brakes because in front of me was an albino deer just standing there. It looked up, then walked away, and I kept driving. I saw lights behind me, but at this point I was looking out for more deer or weird things and ignored them as they kept getting brighter and brighter. This guy's getting really close, I thought, so I looked up and there was nothing there, no cars in sight. This happened 2 more times and I still didn't know where I was, and I was about to call my boyfriend when I made a turn and came out right in the town I lived. When I got home, my boyfriend told me he heard the sound of our front door opening and someone coming inside twice while I was gone, but he checked the house and didn't find anyone. It was an odd night, and I don't think either of us have slept well. I've been to this girl's house twice after this incident, and both times my GPS has taken me right to the highway like normal. I wish I knew what it was about. At the time of this story, I was around 9. I'm from Chinese descent, and my family was going to Canada to see my family and Niagara Falls. I have random flashbacks to this incident, but I randomly had a nightmare about it yesterday, which brought it all to the forefront of my mind. It was in the afternoon, and my father asked me to get the laundry for him down the street from our apartment. I have crappy parents, so if I would have said no, there'd have been severe consequences. He gave me a bag and I left. I had no money or phone, just a chocolate bar and a bag. I remember so clearly. I was wearing a pink unicorn t-shirt with glitter and denim shorts. I was pretty tall for my age, but still pretty thin. The laundromat was near a McDonald's. It has a huge window to see inside. I head inside, and it still had a while until the clothes would be done. So I sit on the bench and eat my chocolate bar. This dude comes in with a backpack. He has a white tank top and red shorts. I don't mind him and continue eating. I noticed he was staring at me for a while, but he couldn't possibly be bad. My mum always said that bad people looked like your stereotypical homeless person and looked creepy. He was pretty good looking and fit, so he's probably just confused. That's when he comes up to me and says, "Hello, where are your parents?" I lied and told him that they'd be back soon, better safe than sorry. He was standing a few feet away from me and says, "I've never seen you here. Are you visiting?" "No, my laundry machine at home is broken." Then it started getting weird. He puts his backpack down, and I realize it's quite empty. I could see the man was ripped. I put the chocolate away and get up to check on the laundry, and it takes a few minutes. He comes closer and then asks, "Are you Asian?" There's no point in lying. I look like a stereotypical Asian child and nod. The next lines I could still hear to this day. "I love Asian women. They're so pretty. I want one for a wife." He reaches into his bag and pulls out some candy. "Here, I see you like this." He tried handing it to me. This is kinda messed up, but when my grandma babysits for me, she always watches this show where men give women food or liquid, the woman eats it and she gets unconscious and the man does whatever. So at this point, I realize it's an issue and begin looking for excuses to leave. It's then that I look out the window and see a teen McDonald's employee outside eating, so I tell the guy, "Oh, let me ask my brother." I walk out and the man is following me. The teen looks at me, puts down his sandwich, and I try to be as innocent and straightforward as possible. I tell the teen, "This man wants to give me candy. Should I take it?" The teen looks at the man and then at me. I try to get him on the same page. Mom said not to take candy from a stranger, but he looks nice. The teen gets it, looks at the man and goes, "Yeah, she's not supposed to have candy, but thank you though." The man, having no shame at all, "Oh, you're her brother? Is she adopted? Here, take my number, if you ever want to get her off your hands," and hands the teen a paper. A crowd is starting to form, and the man leaves. The teen asks if he should call the police, but I convince him not to because my parents would punish me. So the teen walks me to the laundromat to get my clothes, tells me to come into the store with him, and explains to his manager, who he gives the paper to, and the manager lets him leave so he can walk me home. I get to the street and tell him that's my hotel. I thank him and leave. As I was walking back, he stood there, making sure I was safe. To this day, I would like to think that they called the police after I left, and the man is now arrested, but I will never know. To the random McDonald's employee, thank you for saving my life. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. I drive Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. It was Christmas Eve of 2020, and I was running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mum's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. When I get a ride request, it was a pickup from this kind of lower-income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive, I find my passenger, and he has all of his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because the lease was in her name. So I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we have a street that is well known for its vices, be it sex workers, drugs, gangs, weapons, seedy motels, the works. We get to the motel, and he asks for me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man. I'll confess I break the rules a little when it came to Lyft. I had a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reasons being Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people tried to fight me, rob me, and all other kinds of things. But those are stories for another time. The motel happened to be on this seedy street I just mentioned. Homeless people were everywhere, and there was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against a building. I'm a big fan of true crime, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so I help the guy out, and I drive to his door. As I just said, the guy had a lot of stuff, so I started helping him unload his stuff. While on my second trip to get the things, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, and one of the ladies pounded on the door to open up. That was when I saw the guy raise up a shotgun out of the long coat and storm into the room, and the two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting, and was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas," he said, and he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took all the boxes out my hand or slid a $5 into my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my own gun. I knew the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they know I saw the gun. I had to get out. No witnesses. I got into my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops, and gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women, and the occupants of the room they went into said nothing happened, and that I was full of crap. Well, I know what I saw. Better to be safe than sorry. This happened in the summer, around 2016. My twin sister and I grew up in a small, sleepy village in northeast Nebraska called Bow Valley. The population is less than 200 people, and there was only one store open at any given time. We moved back home after college for a little while until we could figure out a plan for our futures. One night at around 2 or 3 in the morning, we were both still awake and having a high amount of anxiety. This was nothing new, as we've had anxiety since we were young. We decided to go for a walk, to try to relieve that constant ache in our chests. Because Bow Valley was so small, everyone knew everyone, and it was a relatively safe place. We had gone for walks at this time before without any incident. We would walk along the main road, which is about a half mile, and connect to the highway. The route is only partially lit by streetlights on each end, the lights of the town, and one singular light at the end of the road, by the highway. My sister and I talked while we walked. We would speak about whatever was in our minds, usually what was bothering us at that moment, and that's what we did. Because of the conversation, the first half of the walk went by really fast. We left the streetlights of the village behind as we walked that half mile to the highway. We were feeling so good at that point from the exercise that we contemplated going even further onto a minimum maintenance road that was on the opposite side of the highway. "You want to keep going?" I asked my sister. "Sure," she replied. We began walking across towards the road. There were no lights on this road, and admittedly, I am a bit scared of the dark. All the same, I was determined to keep going. But as we proceeded, that really good feeling started to go away and was slowly replaced by the feeling of being watched. I found myself looking around into the fields, and dread filled my body. I don't want to go any further. I don't like the way this feels," I said. My sister did not argue. I don't know if it was because she was feeling it too, or because we often respected each other's intuition. Either way, I was happy to turn around and get out of there. We walked back across the highway and onto the main road back into Bow Valley. The streetlight was making me feel safer somehow, and I tried to shrug off that feeling. Then, as we neared closer to the town, we saw something out of the ordinary. We noticed a tall silhouette of a stranger walking on the opposite side of the road towards us. I thought perhaps my eyes were playing tricks on me. I thought maybe it was the streetlights lined up in a particular way. Neither of us had bought a phone or flashlight. "Did you see that?" my sister asked. "Yeah." I felt my heart drop. "Maybe it's a neighbor. It's weird for someone to be out this late, though." "It's weird for us to be out this late," she replied. While she had me there, trying to identify the approaching figure, we concentrated our gaze. The longer we observed, the more things seemed off. The figure was walking away from town, so the streetlights behind it framed its silhouette and movement. The first thing we noticed is that the figure was wearing a coat, which was odd because it was the middle of summer. That's when we began to realize the body language was unorthodox. The motion of the stranger mimicked walking, but not like how you or I do it. It was almost comparable to the movement of arms and legs of a marionette doll. Even more unnerving, this spindly, tall figure was walking swiftly and with purpose. My sister and I both felt uneasy. I had a lighter in my pocket that I placed in my fist, preparing myself in case I needed to punch whatever this thing was. My sister had a pocket knife that she got out and was ready. As we were contemplating our next move, I noticed a car driving on the highway. I sensed it was going to turn our way. "Let's wait and see if that car comes this way," I said. "The light will illuminate whoever that is." Meanwhile, we have slowed to a stop, but the thing was still moving closer and closer. It would only be a short matter of time before it reached us, and luckily for us it did. The car did end up turning onto our road, and so we stayed back and watched what happened. The car neared us, and the lights finally hit the figure. At that moment our blood ran cold, as we both watched this thing fly into the nearby darkness of the field the second the headlights were near. It flew so fast, it was like a tissue tied to a string being yanked in the opposite direction. I remember the silhouette tails of the coat flapping behind it. I remember that the light did not illuminate any part of it, and it remained a dark mass. We looked at each other absolutely horrified, and booked it back to the streetlights of the village and back to the house. I couldn't help but feel that we would have been in danger had it not been for that car. That was the only car we saw that night, and I wondered if the car was the doing of our ancestors, or maybe just a coincidence, or perhaps we were being protected. Either way, this experience has opened our minds, and we have not walked that stretch of road at night again. This experience happened about 4 or 5 years ago on a very hot summer night in a small town in the Midwest. My friend and I were hanging out one night really late when we decided we really could use some IHOP, mostly because it's the only 24-hour restaurant in town and it was around 4 a.m. So I drive us there. On the ride we're being super goofy because I think we were a little too tired and the idea of pancakes, you know. All mirth is drained as we pull into the parking lot and see a group of around 7 men approaching the IHOP on foot. Our windows were down because it was very hot and my car didn't have functioning air conditioning, so we furiously rolled them up and sat quietly to see what they were doing. I can't explain why we were so immediately scared, probably just some drunk guys wanting pancakes, right? Either way, we wait to gauge the situation instead of leaving the car to go inside. The men are obviously plastered drunk. Another detail is that the IHOP is off the highway and quite far from all the residential areas and bars, so they'd have had to have walked quite a way away from the nearest bar to get there. Anyway, we are paralyzed just watching them, hoping they don't notice us in the car. When they do, they start shouting and walking towards us. We lock the doors. They're banging on the windows, shouting unintelligible drunken things. I turn the keys in the ignition and start driving off, but they run after us. They chase us on foot, screaming obscenities before we lose sight of them in the distance, after about a quarter mile. Seems bizarre to me. Obviously they weren't going to catch us, but they futilely ran after us for that long. I don't know, must have just been the alcohol, but it certainly scared the crap out of me. I think they must have been out-of-towners staying at the hotel, since there were several relatively close to the IHOP. That would make sense, more so than them walking all the way from town anyway. Luckily that means I should hopefully never have to run into them again. I have a story to share that takes place in a London hostel 5 years ago. There were 2 friends with me that were both male, and we were staying in a 9-bed mixed dorm. There were 3 sets of 3-tier bunk beds, and I was in the bottom bed of the right bunk. My first friend is on the top bunk, and my second friend is in the middle bunk. So we get in at 2 a.m, and all just quietly get into our beds. After a few minutes of lying there trying to sleep, I hear rustling behind me. I'm lying on my side facing the wall, so I think it's just someone going through their bag and I ignore it. Then I feel a hand on my hip over the cover, and I turned round and see it's a random guy telling me to move over and trying to pull up my cover. I initially thought he was drunk and wasn't sure which bed to be in, so I told him to go find his own bed, and then he shuffled away to the bottom bed of the left bunk. Then he comes back again. I tell him to go back to his own bed and he shuffles back to his own again. This happens another few times with me gradually speaking louder and getting less polite, telling him to piss off. I'm shaking because this situation is making me so nervous, and message my mate that's on the top bunk, saying I don't think I'm going to be able to sleep that night. He messages back casually thinking it's the cause of someone snoring. This is when I find out both my mates have earplugs in, and although they've heard me speaking, they each thought I was speaking to the other friend. So I tell him the situation, and he starts keeping an eye out. I hear the guy go to the bathroom that's an ensuite, but I can tell from the light he's left the bathroom door open while doing so and refused to look. My mate fills me in that the guy was walking around with his pants down and deliberately left the door open to get me to look. But either way, the guy goes back to his bed after, and we think the situation is finally over. Then it happens again. My mate keeps an eye out, shines his phone light on the floor, and shouts for the guy to go away. Apparently he was crawling across the floor towards me. The guy suddenly takes offense at my mate's light shining on him, and starts actually climbing the bunk ladder like King Kong to get on my mate, and was trying to take his phone. They wrestle for a while, with my mate actually kicking the guy in the neck to try to keep him away, only for the guy to swing backwards and come straight back at him again. I use this time to run for security, who find the guy still hanging on the bed when they get there, and they call for the police and have the guy taken away in a riot van and is banned from the building. While the police had dragged him outside waiting for the riot van, the guy even headbutted the brick wall several times. No idea what the guy was on, because it wasn't alcohol, but definitely something to take a kick to the neck, and still act like nothing happened after. The guy kept trying to blame my mate when security came as well, saying things in broken English like, "Come up here and see how violent the guy is." My other mate had slept through the whole incident, kept saying that the next day he couldn't believe how friendly everyone in London was. Please don't let this put you off hostels though. I've travelled in them alone around Europe and never had any problems before. They're usually a great way to meet people or find activities to do in the local area. It was just a one-off creep. This all started when a close friend of mine began exhibiting very odd behavior. Although he'd always been a good friend, something was dramatically changing in him. Intrigued and concerned, I asked him to try and understand what was going on. It was during that conversation that he revealed he was involved in a cult, which explained his behavior and his lack of sleep due to the frequent meetings that happened in the early hours. As my friend shared more details about the cult's activities, my curiosity grew. He suggested the possibility of joining to experience everything for myself. And being quite curious, I accepted the offer, without fully understanding the hole I was getting myself into. My friend asked if I was sure, and I said I was. He then took his phone and called someone from the cult to ask if he could bring a potential member. After exchanging a few words, he told me there would be a meeting the following night for them to see me and make a decision. That night, we headed out to a place outside the city. Imagine we were on the road left of the city, and before reaching the next, there, in the middle of nowhere, we took a dirt road and traveled a while until reaching a place that left me astonished. It was what appeared to be a giant sanctuary, more ostentatious than the city's cathedral. I entered and was met with images of demons, names like Beelzebub and Lucifer adorned the walls. I was taken to a room where I underwent what seemed to be an intense interrogation, questions about my reasons for joining, if I was already in another cult, and if I was a devotee of death. I answered honestly, explaining that my only motive was curiosity, and after the extensive interrogation I left the room, and my friend continued to show me around. It was a somber, imposing and disconcerting environment. The members gathered again and communicated that I would be accepted into the community, or as they preferred to call it, the church, but obviously it was a cult. It wasn't before long that vehicles of all kinds began arriving. Vans, cars, a limo. It was a strange sight. I was expecting to see people in black hoods and scenes worthy of a movie, but it was nothing like that. These were just regular people coming to participate in the event. We had dinner, and at the end, my friend took me back home and told me there would be another meeting in 2 days. Over the months, my friend explained to me about the internal structure and activities. I discovered there were different ranks and that practices were divided by stages. Throughout the years I attended that place, I witnessed and lived experiences that I consider unbearable for many. To avoid dragging on too long, I'll start with rituals that we might consider mild, such as animal sacrifices. I won't go into the specific details, as they were quite strange, but there were sacrifices of chickens and goats and other animals as part of the activities we carried out. One of the questions I asked myself within the sect was the reason for such sacrifices, to which I was informed that each entity had its own form of worship. Some required sacrifices, others just demanded blood, and some others accepted more common offerings like money. For example, there was a figure of Santa Muerte, associated with abundance and the absence of evil, where people usually left money as an offering. And over the years I gradually moved up in level. Each year I learned new practices and rituals. The cult had values that indeed differed from many commandments of the more conventional churches. Throughout my journey I met masters who, unlike leaders, were tasked with teaching and guiding. On one occasion, around 5 or 6 members, including myself, had an option presented to undergo certain intensive rituals for a year and a half to prepare for what they called the Great Revelation. We all said yes, of course. The process was very intense, and I'm not proud of what I'm about to say, but I participated in a human sacrifice. It wasn't pleasant. The year and a half passed, and they told us that we were taken to the very important ceremony that which we'd been preparing. We went to the furthest part of the temple, one in which I'd never been. Upon entering, we found a room. It was kind of a trapdoor in the floor that led to stairs taking us down to a cave. After walking for a small while, we arrived at what seemed to be an arch, 2 wooden pillars joined by bones at the top. There were no doors, which I found odd, because I would understand placing such decorations on a door, but just standing there was a bit odd. There was no visible difference between being on one side or the other. It was a cave. The only thing on both sides was rock. We reached the arch and were given special robes with a symbol on, and then crossed underneath. As we continued walking, one of the people guiding us clarified that upon reaching my designated place, we were absolutely prohibited from speaking and could not make any noise with our mouths. When we reached the end of the cave, there was an old worn-out chair, and around it were things that screamed atrocities. Children's clothes and other details that I wish I had never seen. And behind the chair, carved into the rock, was the Star of David. We were told the fact that we were there indicated that we understood the purpose of that chair, and that if we wanted to take the next step, we had to commit to procuring a sacrifice each year. It was at that moment, disgusted, that I wanted to run away. I knew perfectly well what happened to people who left the sect, and yes, those who hadn't seen what I had seen ended very badly. I didn't even want to imagine what they would do to me if I said I didn't want to continue. Easy sacrifice, I suppose. So, like everyone else, I committed to fulfilling what they were asking. And to formalize the commitment, we made a small blood pact, and then began our journey back. Upon exiting the cave and arriving at the main hall of the temple, that is, the dining room, the highest-ranking members of the cult were waiting for us. They congratulated us, we had dinner, and everyone went home. Seeing what I saw left me unable to sleep for around 3 days, until I just passed out from exhaustion. I couldn't accept what had happened, and I was determined to distance myself from the cult, but I didn't know how. I knew I couldn't abruptly leave, but what I could do was find a way out to gradually distance myself in a friendly manner and without raising suspicion. What I had to do was find a way for my job to transfer me, and then I spoke to the cult to tell them I would be moving and working in another state. In this way, I wasn't running away. Keep in mind that even being far from the cult, I had to continue attending the temple for over a year. But what I did was space out the time between visits, until I just stopped going back altogether. There was no reprisal against me because I didn't leave abruptly but gradually, so it didn't seem like I was trying to flee. I suspect that's why I'm still alive. It's assumed that I'm still a part of the sect, because I never officially left. I just haven't met up with them for the past 8 years. And honestly, I think it's better that way. This was when I was 18. I'm 27 now, so it was quite a while ago, when I was still in college. One day, a group of friends and I decided we were going to check out a road in Metamora, Michigan, that was supposedly haunted. I have always been fascinated by the paranormal, and was obviously super down to go. My friend Emily, on the other hand, was not so keen. While she enjoyed some things that were spooky, she wasn't particularly excited about the idea, since the road does have a bit of a dark history behind it. For a bit of context, in the small town of Metamora, Michigan, lies a 2-mile dirt path, aptly named Blood Road. The legend of how the road got its ever-so-appropriate nickname is because of the legend that a man had taken the life of his wife and dumped her body in the swamps along the path. It is said that the dirt of the road or mortars of the swamp are known to turn red because of the murder. Another legend states that back in the 1600s, there were cultists who practiced Satanism and witchcraft, and they fled into the swampy area due to the abundance of witch hunts and trials that went on during that time. It is said that they were able to practice their rituals and sacrifices here, and spilled blood that stains the dirt road to this day. For a more scientific approach on why the dirt is colored that way, it's because of the red clay mixed in with the dirt. In more recent times, there have been sightings of people performing questionable seances and rituals in the swamps, and even alleged meetings of KKK members. But back to the story. My other friends, Claire and Harriet, were just as interested in going to see Blood Road as I. With a little bit of peer pressure and a promise not to leave the vehicle, Emily finally gave in and decided why not. Of course, if you're going to go to an alleged haunted road, you have to go at night, and that is exactly what we did. We all met up at Claire's house and decided to carpool to Emily's house since she lived on a dirt road anyway and was used to driving down them. Making the 20 to 30 minute trek to Blood Road was pleasant. Harriet and I joked about each seeing something and maybe even catching it on our cell phones, while Claire was talking to Emily about other things, but she was still visibly uneasy. The entire car went quiet as soon as we reached our destination, and the sun had gone down significantly. No more jokes were to be had, nor idle chatter, as I pulled into the 2-mile stretch of muddy road. In the daytime, it isn't as intimidating, since the greenery of the plants and trees lessen the creepiness. However, we were nearing almost total darkness, with only the car's headlights as the source of light. Emily slows to a stop and makes sure we remember our promise to stay in the car. She lowers the windows, and for the first minute or so, all we hear is the typical swamp life. It got eerily quiet all of a sudden, and everyone in the car was hyper-aware of a strange muffled speech in the distance. The 4 of us peered out the window to hear a little better, and as soon as we did that, we recognized the sound to be chanting. None of us could tell exactly what was being chanted, but it did not sound like anything any of us could understand. Emily decided she'd had enough and rolled the window up, and honestly, I couldn't blame her, as we were all unnerved. Nothing really happened to us, except for the fact that we were all spooked by the chanting that we had heard. The drive back was quiet, and none of us wanted to speak as the darkness of the night sky and looming trees swallowed everything while still on Blood Road. I guess Harriet and I got what we wanted, but I'd like to go back again to see what else can be discovered. My friend Jane also had a story to share on Blood Road. Back when Jane was in high school, she and her 2 older sisters and a friend of hers heard about an abandoned house on Blood Road and wished to go explore it. Like myself, Jane is also heavily interested in the paranormal. However, she is a little sensitive to sensing spirits and the like. On a mild winter's night, Jane and her sisters and friend drove down Blood Road and parked on the side near the tree line of the woods. There was nothing spectacular or disturbing about the abandoned houses that they had heard about. It was just old and spooky. They trekked about 10 minutes into the forest before reaching their decrepit destination. The closer they got to the house, the more uneasy Jane became. Eventually it got so bad that she refused to go into the house altogether, as something was telling her not to go in. Jane's sisters and friend still wanted to explore the area, but agreed to take her back to the car as she was clearly disturbed. On the way back to the car, the group came across a small clearing, and as Jane looked up from the ground, she saw a black, humanoid figure around 6 foot tall walking among the trees and vanishing. She was frozen in terror, and a strong sense of dread washed over her. For at least a minute, Jane could neither speak nor move, as she was frightened by what she had seen, and she recalls her sister telling her when she went to grab her by the hand. It was ice cold, and that her face had drained of all color as she stopped walking. Jane's sisters and friends had to force her to move, as she was too scared to do so, but eventually got back to the car. As soon as Jane was in the car, the sense of fear gradually went away, as she wasn't in the vicinity of the house. Her sisters and friend went back to the house to continue to explore. There was the typical graffiti on the walls, some of it occult in nature, and there was evidence of a possible ritual with burnt candles and a few old books. However, they only explored one room due to the sudden feeling of unease and nausea that overcame them the longer they stayed. Fortunately, nothing happened to the three that went back to explore, and they had to call it quits once the nausea and unwelcome feelings became too much. It's been years since this has happened, and nothing ever came of it. But like myself, Jane is willing to go back and see what else can be found on Blood Road. This happened a few years ago. My aunt and uncle own a restaurant, and one Saturday they were moving from their old location to a new one. My aunt, uncle, and boyfriend at the time but soon-to-be husband, and their cousin, and about 10 other people, mostly employees, were helping in the move since there was a bunch of large equipment. We were all at the old restaurant packing things, tying them down, when we ran out of ratchet straps. I offered to drive to my parents' house about 30 minutes away to get more from my dad. Because everyone else was busy, I went alone. On the way back, I got a call from my aunt saying that they were all going to take a load to the new location and to just meet them there. Since I didn't know how to get to the new place, I pulled over into a parking lot and put in the address. From the road, you weren't able to see the parking lot at all because of the trees. The only odd thing that I didn't notice at the time was on this sunny weekend day there were no other cars there. I pulled into a spot and immediately grabbed my phone to put in the address. For whatever reason, I didn't put it in park like I normally do, which unlocks the doors. Less than a minute after, I looked down and heard what felt like a huge hit to the car. I remember looking at him for so long because I thought it was odd how I couldn't see the color of his eyes because of how big his pupils were. It's important to note that I was in a small SUV and he had to bend over to look in the window. A second later, he was pulling on the door handle so hard, I thought he was going to rip it off. I was also confused why the door wasn't unlocked like it normally would be when I'm in a parking spot. He got visibly upset that the door wasn't opening, so he began banging on the side with his fist against the window, swinging his whole arm over and over. Getting progressively more pissed, he moved to the door handle of the back seat, and at this point I was so scared of him getting in the car, I grabbed and unsheathed the camping knife I had in my door. When I looked back at him, he stopped attacking the car, saw the knife and smiled. I think it was right then that I realized he didn't want money. He didn't want to abuse me. He wanted to kill me. I knew that if he had gotten into the car, it would have been over for me, even with the knife. He was way bigger than me and he was hitting the car so hard, I was amazed the windows held. I guess I got comfortable with him not being able to get the doors open, but after bashing the back window a few more times and the car rocking back and forth, the panic got worse, because I knew the doors weren't opening for some reason, but maybe the trunk would. Since it was an SUV, if he got into the trunk, he could just climb over the back seats to get to me. He hit against the back windows with both of his balled up fists and was yelling something I couldn't understand. Right there and then, I realized that I could slam it in reverse. I dropped the knife to my lap, hit the gear shift into R, grabbed the wheel and put my foot down. I have no idea if I hit him or if he jumped out the way because I didn't look back. I put it into drive and peeled out the parking lot. It was my first time ever ignoring a stop sign. I still have no idea why I didn't put it in park, but I'm grateful every day that I didn't. My uncle just got married in his 40s. It was his first marriage, And for their honeymoon, he, his wife, and her daughter, who's a special needs child and awesome, went to stay in a cabin on Big Bear Mountain in Southern California. They rented the cabin, unpacked all of their things, and settled in it for a 3-day stay. On the last night, my uncle was up watching TV very late. His wife and stepdaughter had gone to bed, and he had to use the restroom. So he gets up, goes to the restroom, does his business, and exits it. The only light on in the whole cabin is that in front of the TV in the living room, but it was bright enough to light up the whole living room and part of the hallway too. As he opened the door to the restroom, he saw his wife walk towards the kitchen. He figured she'd gotten up and was hungry, so he was going to go speak with her. He followed after her, and when she reached the end of the hallway, she turned slightly in the direction of the kitchen, and then, at warp speed, ran into it, faster than a human could move. This figure was wearing a long flowing white gown, similar to the one that his wife had worn to bed, and slightly longer than shoulder-length hair. Kinda wigged out, he took a few steps back and peeked into the room, where his wife and stepdaughter were asleep, and found both of them in bed. Needless to say, he couldn't sleep after that, and they left the next morning. He called up the guy that he had rented the cabin from and said, "Hey, you didn't tell me the cabin was haunted." The guy casually replied, "Oh, you saw her." Her, thought my uncle. He'd never specified what he'd seen, proving that he already knew a whacked-out speedster she-ghost was haunting the cabin. 4 years ago, after just getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came into this company as a trainee. I was very demotivated and missed my family a lot. At one point, I decided to go visit the relatives who lived by the coast, which was a 5-hour drive away by car. I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive. But my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another that was close to their town. I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than I was. And the day for the trip came. I met them, and in total it was 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady who was studying medicine, the owner of the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who found their ad on Facebook called Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So, inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or plan to on our trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober and that he wouldn't have any, even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured that they wouldn't be drinking because their parents were very strict and would not let them misbehave. Mark giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot more and denying it." The trip went on, and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was listening to a popular singer from the 90s. After around 2 hours and a half, the driver stopped the car at a gas station, and he needed the toilet. Mark decided to go with him, as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver coming back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of cerveza. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if they want." Almost 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to flat land. The sign said that we were 1 kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, The car took a right turn, leaving the main road and heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolated, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe we were dropping the other girl off, as they probably already knew where she lived. The dude then just parked the car on the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. You guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down for it, but the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink." "Oh, okay, we'll make an exception, only because it was a tough midterm." I refused and said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They all said it was very close, and that worst case scenario I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus at a certain hour to then get to my cousin's house, which was still an hour from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to a point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against the wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone service either, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said if it wasn't okay for any of them to drive, because they were all plastered, I offered to do it for them. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me. Car belongs to my girlfriend." However, his girlfriend refused, saying she didn't even know me, and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but they had to honor the arrangement. After a bit, the driver finally got off from the driver's seat. I assumed they would let me drive, as I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, so I asked the guys next to me to let me off the car. The sophomore girl, who was to my left, did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. The girl started saying, "Come on, Abby, let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside no more." "Alright, sure, but go slow." The previous driver got into the back seat with me, and I was still confined to the middle seat. I was getting upset, and I wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how, because everyone seemed okay with this. My panic worsened when the sophomore girl started asking how to turn the car on and operate it. "You don't know how to drive?" I asked. "No, I don't. My parents haven't let me drive. It's my first time." "Get down then, please. I have a license. I can get you home safely." Then the car's owner told me I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay, that there was almost no one out driving at this hour, and that they could help her friend learn to drive. I asked them to let me get out the car, but they wouldn't let me. They swore it was a very short drive and that we would go slowly and all be okay. The girl really had no idea how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transition. Had it been a manual one, she probably wouldn't been able to even move it. And the car moved, but in the ways you would expect it to move for a driver who had never stepped on pedals of an actual car. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard, drove into the middle of the road and kept freaking out while the others yelled instructions to her, while I pleaded with them to let me out of this moving death trap. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help fear that if a car came, we would surely crash into it, as there was no way she would be able to manage moving the car out of the way in time. But eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was, and as soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car and let me walk there, but they didn't. They forced me to be dropped off at the front. If I were in this situation again, I don't even know how I would get out of it. And I have never taken another ride in that way since. Be careful who's driving you. It's the mid-90s in rural Ohio. Children are free range, smartphones are non-existent, and I'm a quiet, shy 4th grader. That summer, my mum became good friends with a couple who owned a large, beautiful flower farm. Most weekends they would host friends and family for bonfires and s'mores. The adults would drink grown-up beverages, and the kids would explore and play. On this particular evening in the encounter, we had just settled in beside the fire when my mum stiffened beside me. She turned and said to me, "I don't want you and your brother just wandering off. Just play here where I can see you." Now this was unusual and kind of a bummer to my kid self, but she was regularly so lenient that I begrudgingly went along with it. After our s'mores were eaten and before the sugar rush ensued, my mum gathered us together to wash our hands. Once again, this seemed odd, as I was completely capable of using the restroom on my own, as was my younger brother. As we were rounding the corner to the house, we passed a man we had not previously met. My mother grabs both our hands tightly and speed walks us back to the back door, closing the screen door and locking it behind her. In my memory, she was composed, but she later told me she felt breathless and panicked, like a wild-eyed animal. Not long after, we hit the road to get home for bed and church next morning. I remember thinking I wish we could stay and play longer, or even camp there overnight like we did sometimes. But oh well, my child mind did not connect anything odd about the whole situation. It would be many years later, when I was an adult, that my mother would tell me a story I will never forget. She remembers all the same details: the bonfire, the s'mores, the sugared-up kiddos, and the sticky marshmallow hands. But she also clearly remembers the sudden feeling of inescapable dread in the pit of her stomach, and the hackles rising on the back of her neck. Even in front of the bonfire, her blood ran icy cold. She told me all she could think of was, "It's time to go. We need to get out of there." She said it was the most persistent feeling of urgency she's ever felt. She told me that the next day at church, she asked her friend who the new man was who was at their home last night. He replied, "That's my brother. He just got released from prison for child molestation and assault. He and I have never gotten along, but he has nowhere else to go. I asked him to go somewhere else for the evening, but he just showed up back at the house with no warning. I would have never allowed him near children." Her jaw almost dropped to the floor. She told me that before she had ever even seen him on the way back to the house, she could feel his presence. She kept looking into the darkness beside the house and feeling like she was being watched. Instinctively, she knew her children were in harm's way and needed to get them elsewhere. She didn't question it or blow it off. She listened to her gut, which I'm thankful she did. The feelings she experienced that night were so intense, we never went back to their home again. Friends, please, always listen to your gut and stay safe out there. I stayed in a B&B in Pennsylvania that seemed cute enough. They did have a wall of antique dolls in the main room, but otherwise showed no signs of weirdness. That's until we settled into the room. I noticed some scratches on the floor near a bookcase, and after some inspection, realized it was a secret door. When I asked the owner, who gave a creepy vibe, if it worked, he said yes, and showed me that it opened to their office, which was a cluttered room with a computer and piles of crap. It had a lock on their side, and when I asked if there was a lock on my side, he smiled and simply said, "No." When I showed some concern that there was an unlockable entrance to my room that was camouflaged that they didn't tell me about, he just kept smiling. That night I was terrified and barricaded the door and barely slept. When I was 13, I was visiting my grandparents' farm during the summer in rural America. To kill time, I would spend the afternoon fishing alone on a riverbank about 3 miles away and would ATV there. This location happened to also be near a seldom-used campsite. Where I fished, there was a long, steep boat ramp and a dock about 150 feet long sloping down to the water, surrounded by steep, eroded banks with tall weeds and grass, making anyone below the top of the boat ramp invisible to the campers. While I was fishing, a car drove over the top of the boat ramp and parked below me. a guy in his 60s got out and walked over to me. He asked me about what I was fishing for, what I was using as bait, and where I lived. I don't remember all of the conversation, but I started getting creeped out when he eventually offered bait he hadn't used in his car. I declined. After a bit, he said he was a part-time photographer for a fishing magazine and wanted to take my picture for it. Although I was creeped out, I obliged just to see if he would leave soon. He snapped a few pictures of me with my pole and a fish I had caught. After what felt like too long, he began to leave, but then he asked for my address so that he could send the magazine with my pictures in it. Feeling really weirded out, I gave him a fake address with my house number and road name changed. Looking back, I think I might have been in considerable danger. What do you think? Overreaction? Or something more sinister? I was returning from a visit with family. I took a Greyhound bus from the airport to Humboldt County. I typically would have flown in to San Francisco, but for some reason I must have flown into Sacramento or LAX, and I don't remember why, being that it was many years ago. I just remember being on that bus for many hours. It was fairly full, and there was a man on the bus who was very friendly, and we chatted most of the way. He was a contractor, and was going to be staying in Chico for several weeks on a job. The further north we got, the emptier the bus became. I remember noticing that the bus driver was driving rather erratically for much of the trip north. He was also taking a lot of back roads, which is weird, as he was driving inordinarily fast. I was noticing that with each stop there were fewer and fewer people on the bus, until the only two people remaining were myself and the contractor that I had been chatting to. I became very uncomfortable, and I knew that once we got past the Chico stop, there weren't going to be many stops, and we were going to be into the Redwoods, and I knew that I was going to be the only person that was probably going to be on that bus, because the contractor was getting off in Chico, and I was fairly certain that at that hour of the night we were traveling there would likely be very few people who wanted to go to Humboldt County. I felt very uneasy about this bus driver, and I remember just putting my head in my hands and praying and asking for God to protect me and give me a sign whether I should get off the bus in Chico where the man was getting off and simply get a hotel there and hop on another bus in the morning first thing. And I was really nervous about telling the man that I felt uncomfortable, as I didn't know him, and I didn't want to be a burden to him. After a little while, the man turned to me and asked if I felt uncomfortable. He told me that he felt really weird about me being on the bus by myself. I knew at that moment this was the Lord's way of keeping me safe. The man offered to pay for my hotel room, and I accepted his offer. He did pay for my room, and was just the nicest man ever. He didn't try to come to my room or anything like that. He even paid for the brunch they had at the hotel in the morning. It was very nice. I just was reminded of that story and wanted to share it, and I'm thankful I didn't take that bus, because I honestly don't know what would have happened to me if I would have. When I was 14, I worked at a McDonald's that was connected to a gas station. It was a truck stop, so it was very busy 90% of the time. The only downside to working at a truck stop fast food place was that the bathroom was on the complete other side of the building. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I was pretty small. Maybe not in height, but in size. I was around 5'6" and anywhere between 130 to 150 pounds. Not super tiny, but small enough where I probably would have made an easy target. This wasn't a fear of mine, but perhaps it should have been. I remember I was in gym class and it was the middle of the day, and it was one of those days where you could just sit on the side and catch up with work for other classes if we didn't want to participate in the game. My friends and I did this almost every time and almost never actually worked on anything important. We were laughing and joking around until I received Power School notifications on my school's iPad excusing me from the remaining classes of the day. I was really confused, considering my mum hadn't mentioned anything about picking me up early, and I was only seeing my dad every other weekend, and he wasn't the type to pick me up from school. I was grounded, so I didn't have a phone with me other than a cheap flip phone my mum had gotten me from Walmart, so I messaged her about the notification, but before I got a response back from her, my gym teacher told me I needed to grab my things and go to the office because my mum would be picking me up. This confused me even more, and I shot my mum another text asking her if she was picking me up from school. She freaked out and told me not to leave the building. At this point, I'm sitting in the office by the window, waiting for apparently nobody to come pick me up until the situation was figured out. My mum ended up calling the school and letting them know that I wasn't allowed to leave with anyone that day. Apparently, whoever called claimed to be my mum and said that they were coming to collect me. As far as I know, nobody ever showed up to pick me up, and I didn't hear anything else about it. My mum wasn't very comfortable with me working at the truck stop, and we got my location switched to one that was closer in town and wasn't connected to a gas station. What we think might have happened is someone saw my name tag and possibly called all the schools in the area until they found me. But I still have no idea how they figured out my last name. With that being said, to the creepy stranger who pretended to be my mum over the phone and tried to pull me out of school to do who knows what, let's not meet. I was visiting New York City with my wife and 1-year-old. My brother had made the hotel reservation for us, and we thought it would be nice. We arrived and checked in, and then found our way to our room. The halls were a maze, and it took us a few minutes to find our room. It was pretty sketchy, but it was late and we were tired, so we began to settle in. My wife had brought some milk for our kid, and since the room didn't have a fridge, she asked me to take it to the front desk and ask them if they had a fridge we could use. I took the milk and headed into the maze of hallways, and I got a bit turned around but eventually found the elevator. I got in, hit the L button, and rode it down. When the door opened at the lobby, I was met with a dark, narrow hallway. I stupidly stepped out, confused as to what was going on. There were several doors on both sides of the hallway, but all were locked. I walked down the hallway and eventually started to hear music playing. After a few minutes, I turned a corner and almost ran into two big guys. I stopped and stared at them, wondering what the hell was going on. One of the two, after looking up and down at me, paused on the milk I was carrying and asked, "What are you doing here?" I stared for a few seconds and just said, "I'm trying to find the lobby." He then escorted me to the entrance of what turned out to be a strip club. After exiting, I saw the hotel about half a block up the street. Apparently, I took the elevator that the strippers would take with paying clients, and I had no idea. I thought I got lost in the Twilight Zone for a few minutes. A few years ago, my family made the decision to admit me to a rehabilitation center due to problems with alcohol and other substances. My relatives made this decision because I had become uncontrollable. I had hit rock bottom several times, showing no intention of changing and moving forward with my life. I really wish I could tell you where this happened, but as you'll soon find out, I can't reveal the details. I can say that the center was in an old mansion on the outskirts of a city located on one of the several roads leading out of the state of Mexico. From the beginning, I noticed strange behavior among the patients and staff at the center. For example, at night you could hear several people walking through the hallways while murmuring. I understand that in a place of that nature, one must always be alert, especially at night, because the inmates could come up with anything. But having one person for every 2 rooms was enough, because the door was locked from the outside, so no inmate could leave their room during the night, which made it so strange to hear such movement in the hallway. Furthermore, once a month, very strange noises could be heard coming from an area off the center that no inmate could access. These noises lasted between 2:30 to 3:30. At first, it was extremely difficult for me to identify and differentiate the sounds because they were very far away, but it was like a mix of chanting, music, and I could even hear muffled screams. You know, like if someone's mouth was covered while they screamed. Obviously, the first few times I noticed strange things, I asked the center staff, but they always gave me ambiguous answers or simply did not respond, which is why I stopped asking. Another odd thing was that the inmates with the most severe cases, that is, those whose addictions were so strong that they ended up in the center to avoid jail, almost had no family, and those who did could not return to their families because they had exhausted them. So it could be said that those who were worse off had no life outside the center. Well, they had a kind of scar on their left wrist. It looked like a mark made by a razor blade, shaped like a small triangle with a dot in the middle. The fact that I had certain problems with addiction did not impede me from thinking clearly. It was obvious that it was too unlikely for all of them to have known each other before entering, and that for some reason they had made that mark on themselves. The most logical explanation was that they had done so inside the center. I tried to ask them about the marks, but the questions were always evaded, as if ashamed, or that it meant something bad. And so these little odd details that theoretically were not connected began to make me feel somewhat paranoid. My situation and behavior began to draw the attention of the center staff, and their attitude towards me gradually started to change, to the point where I felt they were treating me with hostility. The moment I began to feel attacked was when the food they gave me had a strange taste. Not excessively, but I noticed it. It wasn't that it tasted bad, but it had a certain je ne sais quoi, a flavor that didn't belong there, and it happened with the juices and smoothies. The situation became unbearable when on one occasion I lost consciousness after drinking a juice. When I woke up, I found myself in a room in only my underwear. I was just starting to react when people wearing plastic animal masks entered. Being surrounded by masked individuals was the most terrifying moment of my life. I honestly thought they were going to do something horrible, especially because I was in underwear. But nothing did happen. What they did was hold me down and with a razor blade made the same symbol on me that I had seen on the other inmates, the triangle with a dot. After that, they sat me in front of a chair and a TV and tied me up so that I wouldn't look away from the screen, and began to play a series of impactful recordings. I don't mean what was shown was something very strong. The man, in fact, was only looking directly at the screen. The important thing was what the man said, because everything was done in such a way that it seemed like this person was talking directly to me. I guess the people at the center had everything well studied as to know how to hit low blows in the mind. I also guess they had different recordings for different types of people, because I don't believe the words that the man in the recording was saying would have had the same effect on someone with a very different life to mine. That recording broke me. It attacked my psyche, my behavior, my way of thinking, and it made me feel that everything bad that had happened to me was my fault, and that my life was a mess because I was a mess. I was looking at that screen for more than 12 hours, and I felt something inside my mind break. Every word that man said penetrated deeply into my brain. I guess that was the idea. They wanted to break me. And after that, they released me, gave me clothes, fed me, and let me sleep in my room. The next day, I didn't want to leave my room at all because I felt vulnerable. But in the early hours, they forcibly took me out and dragged me back to the room again. I couldn't scream because they covered my mouth, and as they dragged me, they tore my clothes until I was only in my underwear. They tied me to the same chair and replayed all the recordings, and so they kept me for 6 weeks. I don't remember much of what happened during that time, because they were breaking my mind. In fact, the only reason I know it was 6 weeks was because every time they took me back to my room after being tied to that chair, I would make a mark on the wall to count the times they took me. In total, they took me 21 times in 6 weeks. During that month and a half, I witnessed many things that I gradually remembered. The point is, after, something happened. There was a fire in the kitchen. The flames spread quickly, devouring the facilities. Of course, both I and many of the inmates knew that this was the perfect opportunity to escape from that hell. Instead of trying to control the fire or help others get out, several of us made our way through the fire to get out of there. Since most of the staff were at the front, we escaped through the back. So when we got out of the center, we didn't head towards the road, but towards the mountain. Of course, the most logical thing would have been, since we were outside, to simply go around the building and run towards the road. But none of us were thinking clearly at that moment. So we ran and went deep into the mountain. The mountain led us to a hill. In all that chaos, we separated. I don't know what happened to the others, but I hid in a ditch I found on the way because I didn't want to climb the hill. I stayed there hidden in the ditch until the sun set, and at dusk I walked to the other side of the mountain and luckily found the road. I stayed at the side of the road until I flagged down a car and a couple stopped and offered their help. They didn't ask questions, as if they realized I was in a bad state, and the last thing I needed was to talk about what happened. I asked them to please take me to my family's house. It wasn't actually that far, and they did. When I made it back, I told them what they'd done to me. Well, what little I remembered, but of course they didn't believe me. My family believed what was reported on the local news. The news said that several of the inmates had organized to set the place on fire. But the truth is, I don't care whether they believe me or not. The only important thing was that the place was completely destroyed, and therefore I no longer had to return. But the nightmare didn't end there, because as the days went by, I began to remember some of the things that happened during the 6 weeks I was subjected to the brainwashing. The memories I have and scenes are without much context. That is, just fragments. To give you an idea, imagine you're watching the trailer of a movie that has many disconnected sequences that weren't necessarily in order and lacked context, but I was still able to reconstruct some of what happened. What I can assure you is the rehabilitation center was just a facade for a cult, with significant influence to carry out their tumultuous activities. As you can imagine, there were certain types of sacrifices, but the members of the cult never dirtied their hands with blood. They needed scapegoats to do the work for them. That's where the symbol of the triangle with the dot in the center becomes relevant. Within the cult, that symbol signifies something like permission to corrupt the laws of nature, meaning that those who have the symbol marked on their skin are allowed to kill. So, what they did was choose people just as they chose me, broke our minds, and left us so damaged that they could manipulate us to the point that we would obey without question. I don't understand much about the subject, but I'm sure that being in underwear while we were subjected to brainwashing was to make me feel defenseless and make it easier to break me. Now I understand why those who had the mark refused to talk about it. They must have endured horrible things without being able to resist, because their will was ashes. I remember some of the things those people forced me to do. I pulled teeth from more than one person without anesthesia, forcibly removed nails, broke noses, and other things I'd rather not mention. The person I did that to did not perish during the process, because in those sect sections there was a doctor in charge of keeping them alive, so that they could have a bigger show. I guess all the victims were people who were kidnapped, or homeless, people who were sex workers, orphans, I don't know. The important part is I did terrible things to them, and I know that even though I don't intend to do it, even though I was forced, I know that I did it, and that God will punish me for it. Because every time I have a nightmare, I see myself in hell. After surviving a brutal 5-day work marathon with just a measly 10 hours of sleep, I jetted off abroad, exhaustion weighing heavily on me as I arrived to the motel, a dilapidated building with dark carpets and blankets. I was tired and barely registered the subpar conditions. With sleep claiming me almost immediately, I drifted off at around 8 p.m. local time. The shrill ring of the motel phone pierced through the silence and woke me up. On the other end, a voice claimed that there had been a noise complaint. Bewildered, I told them I had been soundly asleep and hadn't made any noise at all. The caller was persistent and questioned that perhaps there was someone else in the room with me. I told them there wasn't and fell back asleep without further incident. When I woke again, I felt a nagging sense of unease. Reflecting on what had just happened over the phone, why had the motel staff been so insistent on clarifying my solitary status? The realization dawned on me that the motel hadn't initiated the call at all. It seemed likely that someone had been systematically calling rooms, probing to determine the occupants and their numbers. Grateful for the extra security measure of the latch chain lock, I couldn't shake the feeling of relief that I had avoided whatever sinister intentions lay behind this mysterious caller. I usually sit in the front of the bus, perhaps because I'm close to the entrance, or perhaps because I feel more secure near the driver. I just hang down my head listening to my headphones, but only ever with one, because I like to hear what's happening around me. This was the first time I saw him. I heard when he started to speak with me, so I put down my headphones and the bus was quite empty. It was just me and one other person who was far in the back. The driver was between 30 and 40. He looked just like a bus driver at that age, a little overweight with blonde hair and a couple of days without shaving. "You gonna work?" "Yeah." This bus was a common line to get to the one large workplace around my area. He asked a few questions, just some small talk, and I didn't mind. Then he started telling me about his ex and her kids. "She called the police on me. I just need to put my lotion on my crotch. The kid was in the bathroom with me, but I need to do it because the doctor told me I need to do it every day." I froze. I didn't see that coming. Then I heard his story about how he was not a child toucher. He just needed to put his ointment on his parts, and it just so happened to be at the same time his girlfriend's kids were around him. And all the details that she was crazy. I honestly didn't know how to respond. I think I told him something about, "Yeah, but if you're innocent, they'll see that." It was the longest bus ride and most uncomfortable one I've ever been on. I just wanted it to end. I thought of calling the bus company, but on the other hand, he was already under investigation by the police, so I never called them. I'll never forget the last line in our conversation. "Do you have kids?" I told him I did not. I work in the restaurant business, and we had a regular customer who just stared at everyone. He would try to hide it if you caught him looking. He would come into the store, sit in the corner, and just stare at the workers. We all deduced he was homeless because of his attire. Since it was getting super cold out, we let him stay if he didn't bother anyone. There were times he would go into the restroom, creak the door open and just stare. One day he stopped showing up to our store. We were all unsettled by him, so we didn't think too much of it. Well, after a while, our boss comes across a local news article, and it showed a mugshot of a man who attempted to stab his mother to death. It was the same guy who came to our store staring at people. Last I heard, he had a $200,000 bond, and someone bailed him out. His mother was okay, but evidently she was stabbed something like 12 times. I worked in a haunted pub. There was a manager who got shot in a bar fight in the 20s, who you could see wandering up and down the bar every now and then. He was chill. The pub manager lived above the pub, and there was apparently a room you just did not go into. There was an old lady in there, and she was evil, and apparently no one could stand being in there for more than a few minutes from just the atmosphere. We also used to get a lot of concerned women coming to the bar asking about the little girl in the bathroom on her own and to check on her. She would always stand right by the bathroom entrance. She liked to knock on the bathroom stall doors. She was pretty chill, just mischievous. I'll start off by saying that high school was the beginning of years of horrible bullying and mental and emotional abuse, especially from the people who were supposedly my friends. I was short, chubby, homely, and apparently very socially awkward. I had high hopes that going off to university and leaving these people behind would be the end of it, but I could not have been more wrong. My tormentors from high school were mean, but the people I lived with on my residence floor were downright hostile and cruel. Everything I was bullied about in high school were things they hated me even worse for. Needless to say, I was beaten down to a pulp, spineless, self-hating, and traumatized. The summer between my first and second year at school ended up being life-changing. I dropped a bunch of weight, grew into my looks a bit more, and learned how to do makeup, dress nicely, and greatly improved my social skills. I went back that next year an entirely different person. Suddenly I wasn't picked on anymore, and for the first time in my life boys were noticing me, and I was actually getting pretty popular. Over the next 2 years, I continued on this upward trend, and by the summer before my final year, I was the happiest and most confident I had ever been. However, that did not erase the years of trauma and abuse that had so badly damaged my psyche. Despite finally being in a good place, inside I was still a beaten down, spineless little girl who never stood up for herself and let people push her into doing things she didn't want to do because she felt like she had to. And this is where my story begins. One night my friend Jaina invited me out to a bar with her friend Glenn one Saturday night. Why not? I hopped on a bus and told her I was on my way. When I got to the bar, Jaina waved me over to her table where she was sitting with this massive, hulking guy. Not like a bodybuilder, but more reminiscent of Hodor from Game of Thrones. "Alice, this is Glenn?" We exchanged our pleasantries and proceeded with no longer being sober. As the night wore on, it was pretty obvious that Glenn was interested in me. He kept smiling at me flirtatiously and giving me the look up and down, and he really liked that I was into things like video games, movies, and comic books. I guess he wasn't doing anything overtly aggressive or creepy, but something about him just gave me bad vibes that said, I don't know about this guy. But I kept telling myself it was all in my imagination. A few days later, the three of us made plans to see the new Spider-Man movie that had just come out. As I was getting ready, I got a call from Glenn, informing me that Jaina had given him my address, and that he was going to be coming over to walk me to our university campus where Jaina still lived. I got the bad vibes again, thinking I didn't want him walking with me. So I said, "Oh no, don't do that. It'll be much easier to go separately, and just meet me at Jaina's." His response was a very aggressive no, and that he was going to walk me. Okay, that was a tad alarming, but I knew he wouldn't relent, and that we would be walking the 30 minutes to campus together whether I liked it or not. When the movie ended, Glenn invited us to hang out and drink at his place, where we would stay the night. He lived a good ways away from where Jaina and I did, so staying the night did make sense, but I felt uneasy and thought to myself, I'll be fine, I'll be with Jaina. It wasn't fine. For some insane reason, he felt a good way to impress me was showing me how much he could drink, because that's what everyone's looking for in a partner, which was much less than he thought. And soon he was horrendously drunk. And that, my friends, is when it all hits the fan. He turned into a complete ogre. began punching out lights and tearing his clothes to shreds in a drunken rage before running into the bathroom and loudly expelling everything. When he came back, Jaina got up to use the bathroom next, and I begged her not to go, or at the very least to let me come in with her so that I wouldn't be alone, but she said no and left me to fend for myself. That's when Glenn grabbed me and started making out with me, shoving his tongue down my throat. Did I mention he had literally just puked his guts out and even had some on what little was left of his shirt? I started pushing him away, which was difficult as he was much taller, heavier, and stronger than I was. This, of course, angered him, and he started breaking things again. That's when I got a text from Jaina. "We should go. He's absolutely pathetic like this." And I immediately called for a cab. We informed Glenn that we were leaving, incensing him even further. "Yeah, well, I'm not gonna let you leave." That's when we ran out the door to the street. Fortunately, he didn't chase after us, and our cab got there quickly. We were dropped off at Jaina's residence building where we lamented the night, and I pulled the sliver of broken light bulb from my foot. Now, a word about Jaina. Like me, she too had suffered years of abuse and trauma that manifested itself in a horrific taste in men to whom she'd be completely subservient. That I knew, but what she told me next shocked me even more. Her and Ben were actually casually hooking up, and had been for a while. He took her home that night after the bar, and as he was literally climbing into bed with her, he told her how much he wanted to bang me, and he wanted her help to make it happen. Remember what I said about the fact that I'm into video games, movies, and comics? That also meant that I pinged on his gaydar, and he said to her, "If she doesn't do it with me, it means she's a lesbian." Now that was some next level stuff right there. The next day, Glenn texts me. "Little birdie told me you're not very happy with me." That bird is very right. "Yeah, sorry I acted that way, so you'd be interested in playing some mini-golf sometime?" I could not believe the nerve of him. A half-assed apology over such horrible behavior that he was barely acknowledging, and then asking to hang out again? I knew that was insanity, but beaten down, spineless little me still thought maybe I should give him a partial second chance. Maybe, but if you think I'll ever have any funny business with you, you're out of your mind. What? Course not. In fact, I'm offended you'd even think those were my intentions. Yeah, no, I'm out. Unfortunately, he also knew the store that I worked at and came to my checkout aisle a few times, once to buy a replacement for the t-shirt he ripped apart, and would try to strike up casual conversation before suggesting we go somewhere together. I'd treat him as coldly as possible and give him a very definite decline. He seemed to have finally given up, as he stopped coming by, much to my relief. But that was not quite the end. A few weeks went by when I received a furious text from Glenn. "Oh, so what, you ain't even gonna talk to me anymore?" I couldn't believe it. After everything he'd done and said, he thinks I'm the arse in all of this? How could someone be so self-centered and deluded? I told him of course I wasn't talking to him anymore, that he's beyond abusive, unhinged, and thinks he can have whatever he wants. And I made it very clear that I didn't want to see him again and just leave me alone. He never messaged back. But rather than make me feel better, I was growing increasingly paranoid. Did that mean he had truly given up? Or was he planning another attack? Luckily, my roommate and our best friend were big, burly guys and made sure to escort me around because he knew where I lived and where I worked. And I'm happy to say that the text message really was the last I heard of him. "Glenn, I don't wish you ill. In fact, I hope you get the help you much desperately need. But please, let's not meet again." In the early 2000s, I worked in a grand hotel and casino, housed within a beautiful building constructed in the mid-1880s. Given its age and history, it wasn't uncommon for rumors of hauntings to circulate. There were always a few hallways and rooms on the second floor where eerie incidents occurred, with sightings of a mysterious object, sometimes grey or black in colour. One afternoon shift, a colleague of mine called Michael had to be sedated by a paramedic due to extreme panic. I only heard about this story secondhand as I was working somewhere else at the time, but what I knew was that Michael had to be urgently taken to the hospital. According to Michael, he was cleaning the kitchen's hot section in preparation for the evening service when he encountered something unsettling. Alone and in the kitchen, he saw a dark shape without clear edges drift across the room and vanish into the adjoining area where mysterious objects had been spotted before. The figure made no sound, and Michael only noticed it because he caught it in his peripheral vision. He was a devout Catholic, and after that experience refused to work alone in that kitchen. Several months later, during a standard graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I found myself tasked with entering the very room where sightings had occurred. It was around 3:40 a.m., and I braced myself for an eerie encounter. As I unlocked the door and stepped into the room, I was greeted by a mundane scene. A large bar fridge with a red Coke logo in the corner, surrounded by stacks of glasses and various other items. There was even a broken poker machine tucked away in another corner. The anticlimactic nature of this room struck me, and I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, thinking, of all of the rooms, this is the one you chose to haunt? In the end, Michael pursued a career as a bus driver, perhaps to get out of the hotel once and for all. Sometimes in the late 2000s, my family was coming back from visiting some extended family. This was in a somewhat rural, industrial Midwest state. My dad was driving with my grandma, mum, brother and me in the car. I was in my late teens at the time. It was dusk and would soon be getting dark. We were on a back road because my grandma was navigating and didn't know what a highway was. There were some industrial buildings and stuff around, but it was all shut down or abandoned. So we're cruising along, and my grandma spots a person in one of those big electric wheelchairs that lays back. They're just sitting in an empty lot by the road. It was so out of place, and there was no one around, and it was starting to get dark. My grandma was a saint and really wanted to stop and see if they needed help, but I had a horrible feeling and felt sick thinking about it. I voiced my concerns about how something seems very wrong, and luckily my dad agreed and we didn't stop. It was a fraction of a second encounter. We didn't even slow down, but we tried to figure out what to do for a few minutes after we passed. I just had a nauseous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I don't know if it was a trap or someone who needed help that was just hanging out for some reason. This all began when I was trying to sell a watch on Facebook Marketplace. I get a message from the guy in question, and he's extremely pushy, and that he wants the item quickly. They agree to come over to my house to pay for the item. I tell them that I don't have any change and to bring the exact amount. He tells me that he needs me to have change and that he will be unable to fulfill my request. He says this several times, which I find increasingly odd. I mean, if you want the watch, just get the change, bro, am I right? Anyway, the day comes and he arrives to my house. He parks round the corner so I can't see the vehicle, and when I open the door, he fumbles with his money and says he doesn't have the right change. What a surprise. I tell him that he needs to go get it, and then he says to come to his car and that he has the change there. Instead of going to get the change himself, he beckons me to go with him to the car, while I still have the watch in my hand, which I really didn't want to do. He then pleads that I do so, and so begrudgingly, I step past the boundary of my home and over the side of the house to where his car is parked. When I turn the corner, I see there are several people waiting in the car. At this moment, I start to get a very bad feeling. It feels like he's luring me away from my home, and with these guys who look like they're about to leave the car, I realize I could be in danger. So I take the money, throw him the watch, and run back to my house and leave it at that. I don't know if I was overreacting in this situation, but the fear, anxiety, and general situation really gave me some red flags that I wish I'd have seen sooner. In any case, be careful when selling stuff online and giving people your home. You never know who you're letting know where you live. I was staying in a chalet in the state of Maine, Vermont, with 3 others. The lady at the front desk was approximately 1 billion years old, with cloudy eyes, and her front desk was a small table next to a recliner in a room full of knickknacks and china dolls. The actual room was what I imagine a hotel room in the 40s would look like, and obviously had never been remodeled. The bathroom had a metal claw foot tub, and the worst part though was the door at the back of the room. I assumed it would be another closet, but we opened it and there was nothing but cold and darkness. We used the flashlight on our phones and discovered a long, wide, cement-walled hallway. I assumed it was used to travel between rooms when the weather was bad, but the vibe it gave off was making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night went smoothly and nothing ever happened, but I still feel like we survived a night in a boring horror movie. I tried to look for it again, but with no results. I have to ask my grandma who booked the trip. She managed to find a review on Orbitz. Room was okay, bathroom was clean and modern, but a few things had bothered us. One were the flies in the room. Not many, but we did have to squat several before we could go to sleep. Each room has a back door to an unlit hallway, and when we arrived to the room, that door was unlocked and wide open. We closed and locked it, of course, and in our second room, the back door was closed but unlocked, so we locked it. When we came back later that evening, the door was unlocked again. Needless to say, we were spooked. We hadn't left anything in the room during the evening, so nothing was taken or disturbed, but I would still not go back.